The night the second racer announced itself, the sky over Mauna Kea looked clean enough to drink. I was nursing a stubborn receiver through calibration when the alert feed flared like a city after a blackout. Two pale ephemerides uncoiled across my monitor, thin silver threads curving toward the inner system. One label I knew, 3I Atlas, the Interstellar caller already turning conferences into boxing rings. The other wore only a placeholder, Object Beta, no pedigree, no press release, just a stack of numbers dense enough to hum. My hands did what training taught them while the rest of me relearned how to breathe. I opened the pipeline, checked stamps, and watched observatories pop like fireflies on a world map, Hawaii and Chile. Beta's photometry arrived ragged, as if it were breathless too. Within minutes the residuals settled. 2 curves, 2 visitors, crossing the ecliptic like skaters borrowing the same line. I started a clock. 90 days to perihelion for Atlas, fewer for the newcomer if the fit held. Early orbital solutions are living things, shedding skins with every measurement, but this one already felt confident in the way that makes you wary. I pinged the network. Greenbank, Parks, Fast, the VLA, the JWST schedulers, even the occultation diehards, and caught my reflection in the glass, a red-eyed project scientist who had promised to sleep when the universe allowed. Picture a racetrack drawn in gravity. Lanes are ellipses and hyperbolas. Flags are resonances. The crowd is everyone with a telescope and a reason to care. Atlas had lane position, retrograde and low inclination, a known troublemaker but at least a public one. Beta entered wide and hot, its asymptote steep. Their apparent motions braided for a few hours, then separated by a breath. My neck prickled the way it does when statistics start to dance. The alert tone has the personality of a dentist's drill. A NOAA advisory appeared because the pipeline still thinks anything unexpected might be weather. Detection stamps unspooled across the night. Times, air mass, seeing, signal-to-noise ratios. I dumped the stream through a quick orbit fit and watched the residuals settle like dust after someone slams a door. Atlas and Beta overlaid cleanly on the plane of the inner system, a matched set of trajectories curving toward heat. Why should anyone beyond our sleepless circle care who reaches the sun first? Because arrival times aren't trivia. They decide which instruments we can swing and which spacecraft can pivot. They decide whether we sample a coma rich with first-time volatiles or a baked rind that has already told its secrets to sunlight. They decide whether radio telescopes catch a quiet sky or one accidentally lit by plasma instabilities that masquerade as messages. They determine headlines, budgets, and the difference between a footnote and a field. Here are the rules, or the lies we call rules. Interstellar objects ride hyperbolas and whisper, "I'm unbound." Radiation pressure pushes on dust like wind on flags. Outgassing kicks like a broken thruster and ruins the tidy gravity we teach freshmen. Nickel sometimes shows up in spectra without iron for reasons we hope to understand as soon as we secure funding. A nucleus can be tiny and still perform like a prima donna. We recite these mantras and then watch the universe rewrite them whenever it feels theatrical. In the control room, the fight was polite and sharp. Coincidence, said one camp. The galaxy is large. Sagittarius covers a county-sized patch of sky, and 2 oddities from that direction prove nothing. The other camp smiled a tired smile. If you wanted to be found by radio, you would whisper at the hydrogen line. If you wanted to be seen, you would send a rock that flares early. We were not arguing about aliens, we were arguing about priors, how much weirdness you allow before you change the model of the world. Schedules shook themselves like wet dogs. A postdoc in Canberra wrote a Doppler drift script between sips of instant coffee. Fast cleared a slot at 1420 MHz because nobody wanted to be the institution that didn't look. The JWST sprouted a contingency flag that made 3 project managers age a year. Meanwhile, the internet did what it does best. Animated arrows, breathless countdowns, and a clip of 2 racehorses color-graded to comet tails. I repeated the title to myself as if it were a spell. A new object is racing. 3I Atlas toward the sun, Who gets there first? I am your unreliable narrator with keys to a handful of control rooms and enough coffee to trigger a safety review. I will tell the first 72 hours as they felt from the chair I didn't leave, the moments when numbers turned into story and story tried to harden into meaning. The night before the network meeting, Beta's light curve hiccuped, just a tooth, just enough. Our latest fit shaved hours off the projected crossing time near Mars's orbit. A single parameter refused to behave, a whisper of non-gravitational force that shouldn't have mattered yet. If the number held, we weren't merely late, we were behind a runner who knew a shortcut. I brought the gain down and opened the slit of the window to cold volcano air. The dome creaked the way old ships creak when they decide to keep you. On the monitor, the two silver threads inched forward on their math. Somewhere, the sun was rehearsing its part, indifferent and lethal. We would take what the light gave us and call it data. We would argue about it until someone was promoted or retired. But first we had to watch two strangers try the same gate. I saved the fit, set the recorder to continuous mode, and wrote a note to the morning team that read like a dare. Check Beta's residuals against a radial pressure model and run the hydrogen line watch all night. The replies stacked instantly, a chorus of yeses punctuated by a skull emoji from the radio desk. In the hallway, someone laughed. The laugh, people laugh when they are too tired to be afraid. Outside, Mauna Kea held its breath. I could feel the mountain in my soles and the instruments in my jaw. The sun would take both of them. Only one would get there first, and firsts write the headlines, shape the money, and bend careers for a decade. I whispered a promise to the part of me that still believes physics listens when spoken to softly. Then I went back to work, because the universe had started a race, and for better or worse, I had ringside seats for us all. A new object is racing, 3i Atlas, toward the sun. Who gets there first? There, I said it on air. That's the banner over my desk, the crawl on the control room monitors, the line I'll be judged by when the dust cools around the sun. 2 inbound strangers, 1 finish line, 1 clock. I'm betting my voice, my sleep, and my reputation that I can tell you, cleanly and loudly, which one kisses fire first. Before we take another step, we lock the game. The finish line is perihelion, not the first telescope to shout, "I see it." We time it in barycentric dynamical time, the same heartbeat our ephemerides use. Arrives first means the instant each object's osculating orbit bottoms out around the solar system's center of mass, not the moment a coma brightens, not the flash of a dust jet, not a press release snapshot. Non-gravitational push from natural outgassing is allowed. Deliberate propulsion is not. If some engine lights, we move that contestant to the technology class and keep the natural race intact. A tie is possible. If the epochs are indistinguishable within uncertainties, we will call it a draw and show our work. The track is narrow and bright. Both objects ride hyperbolas that cut across our daylight, slicing through windows where the sun's glare blinds cameras and saturates receivers. There will be hours when we can only listen instead of see. Northern arrays will hand off to southern dishes. The roster is set, JWST for heat, Hubble for shape, VLT and ALMA for spectra, fast and the VLA for whispers, and Goldstone for radar if geometry smiles. How do we call a photo finish in vacuum? If the computed perihelion epochs land within 10 minutes, we trigger review. JPL Horizons and the Minor Planet Center will publish preliminary elements. Our campaign board reconciles clocks, light time corrections, and propagation delays. Majority vote among independent teams sets the certified order. We'll release both TDB and mirrored UTC with uncertainties so amateurs can check our math and tell us where we slipped. My plan stays public because secrecy breeds ghosts. Every night I'll stream the war room, sky maps, schedulers, and residual plots that show exactly how wrong we are. GPS discipline boxes timestamp every frame and spectrum. Raw files and reduction scripts drop into a mirrored archive as they land. If a narrowband tone rises near 1420 MHz, the waterhole, I'll chase it, but the commentary moves to a separate channel so the timing stays clean. Now the headline becomes a contract between us. A new object is racing 3i Atlas toward the sun. Who gets there first? That is the premise and the promise. A fair race, clocked in the open, adjudicated by people who care more about the truth than the laurels. Two shadows are already carving toward the inner system while the world leans closer to its speakers. I'm here to keep the clock honest, ready, strap in, breathe slow, and watch the sun sharpen like a blade at high noon. The night sky became a racetrack the moment two streaks carved themselves across my screen. I overlaid both trajectories on a dark atlas of stars, two faint vectors tilting inward, converging not on each other, but on the same fire at the center of everything, the sun. In my head, I heard pit lane clatter, pings, clicks, a starter's inhale, two inbound objects, one finish line. Who gets there first? The first contender already carried a number on its flank, 3I Atlas. The designation felt ceremonial, like a medal pinned by the cosmos. Third confirmed interstellar visitor, discovered by the Atlas survey. I remember the alert as a thin silver tone at 0311 UT, my phone cutting pale light into the lab. The pipeline flagged, the humans checked. The orbital fits tightened, then the verdict we whisper only when we are sure, hyperbolic, inbound, real. The geometry arrived clean, eccentricity greater than 1, the signature of a wanderer that will never loop back. Inclination modest, nearly coplanar with the ecliptic yet retrograde, like a car taking the freeway backward with its brights on. The radiant hid in the crowded script of Sagittarius, where the galaxy writes in bold and the radio sky never sleeps. Perihelion clustered around late October on every reasonable solution. The clock started ticking as my coffee cooled. At first glance, 3I Atlas looked small, but its behavior threw long shadows. The coma lit early, a ghost jolted awake farther out than most locals rouse. A pale tail lifted at an angle, chalk-thin at first, then lengthening into a river. Spectra arrived with the first murmur of infrared, carbon dioxide louder than water by a ratio that shoved the needle past unusual and into Y. Nickel lines stood up where iron usually follows and did not. The plot refused to blink. Advantages lined up. We had time on approach, months to watch heat turn the lock and chemistry confess. JWST could drink its infrared, Hubble could box its silhouette, ground arrays could triangulate jitter and spin. Disadvantages were obvious. The sun is not a gentle referee. Phase angles would burn. Still, 3I Atlas felt like a runner with a plan. Then a second streak appeared, abrupt and a little rude, like a rival rolling into the grid. New object, my console announced with the unnervingly calm voice of an elevator. It tripped multiple motion filters at once, fast drift across stacked frames, high residuals after known object subtraction, brightness growth, inconsistent with trailing artifacts. I stared at the subtraction panel, the ghost after the ghost, and watched it move. Too quick for a main belt stone, too clean for satellite junk. Its geometry began as a sketch, a charcoal gesture across a fogged mirror. Early fits put eccentricity above 1, with a vector sliding toward the plane of the planets like a blade finding its sheath. The error ellipse was wide enough to skate figure eights inside, a short observation arc, few nights. A Monte Carlo spray of clone orbits fanned like cards, some promising a perihelion before 3I Atlas, others lagging, a handful threading close to Mars's lane before diverging. Size. The light curve bobbed like a restless heartbeat. Albedo unknown, as always at the start, but the amplitude hinted at a small body with reflective patchwork. Color indices would not sit still on familiar slopes. No definite coma yet, only a haze that might be physics or might be wishful thinking. Still, there were frames where a faint puff, almost a sigh, peeled away sunward, and the histogram leaned forward to listen. Rock, ice, both, or neither. My gut refused a bet, and my pen kept writing. We spun up the chase. JWST penciled windows. Hubble cued narrow-angle shots between more famous obligations. Fast took a bead on the hydrogen line because tradition is stubborn, and the VLA blocked out slots for wideband sweeps. Over at Mars, orbiters checked pointing budgets, whispering about grab-shot spectroscopy if the newcomer swung close enough. Solar physicists wanted in too, hungry to see how a raw wanderer surfed the heliosphere's wind. Everyone loves a new instrument. This time the instrument was the sky. We needed rules, if only to feel civilized while the universe sprinted. First to perihelion is first in, I told the status call, a grin sitting wrong because the sun makes all rules petty. Bonus if we catch coherent radio near 1420 MHz or any modulation with structure that survives independent verification. Penalties for blind spots during solar elongation minima. Extra credit if we measure non-gravitational acceleration with uncertainties small enough to make the theorists sweat. Half joke, half manifesto. 3i Atlas held its line like a seasoned runner. The coma thickened, peeling into filaments that curled as if the vacuum itself were painted with brushstrokes. Carbon dioxide stayed loud, water reluctant, and nickel kept singing a lonely aria. Photometry settled into a rhythm that suggested a modest nucleus with a talent for theatre, lots of surface area per mass, or fractures that opened like shutters when the sun knocked. From some angles it looked delicate, from others it looked like a fist with frost. The newcomer was craftier. It dimmed when we expected it to brighten and brightened while we argued exposure times. Its phase curve kinked in a way that made interns invent adjectives. On 2 nights, the seeing was good enough to swear the point spread function wore a halo, but the next night it arrived as a needle with no cloud. My notes filled with conditional verbs. We do not love conditional verbs, but they are honest, and honesty is the only luxury that pays when heat counts seconds. Some nights, around 3, when everyone stops pretending coffee is a food group, I let myself think about the symbolism press officers would pounce on if I did not muzzle them first. One visitor with a pedigree and a dossier of odd chemistry. One outsider with barely a provisional name and the audacity to enter the same lane, both inbound from a direction heavy with myth, Sagittarius, where the galaxy's heart rattles instruments and egos. I am not superstitious. I am, however, a mammal. Choose your horse, I told the team, the way a coach picks a fight with a mirror to wake before a match. We took a straw poll and pretended it was a systems check. Half-stacked chips on 3i Atlas, more data, better models, fewer surprises. Half pointed at the upstart because the unknown is a gambler's poison and we are all a little poisoned already. I kept my vote to myself and checked the time. The sun does not wait. Neither do objects that pass once within the memory of a species. By dawn, both tracks on my screen had shifted in that almost imperceptible way the cosmos prefers. Tiny nudges that add up if you refuse to sleep. I saved the plots and closed my eyes and saw them anyway, 2 threads tightening toward heat. And every clock on Earth seemed to lean in and listen together that night. Somewhere in the noise, a story was setting its bones. I would follow it with lungs held, pen ready, stopwatch running, until one of them crossed the line and the other learned what it means to lose a race you cannot run twice. Point your ear towards Sagittarius and the sky stops being quiet. It becomes a plaza, crowded, bright, argumentative, where any whisper must be razor-thin to be heard. The static feels heavy, like weather on the screen, yet inside that pressure, slits of order stitch through the noise, threads so straight they feel deliberate. Toward the galaxy's heart, everything sounds like a story waiting to be finished. Sagittarius isn't only mythology's archer, it is geometry. Aim there and you stare down the barrel of the Milky Way. Star swarms, molecular clouds, supernova scars, and the monster we call Sagittarius A. The radio floor rises, scattering Fatten's pulses, fields twist polarization. Hope and headaches in equal measure. We've always made legends for that part of the sky. Early radio pioneers called it the source. SETI mapped it as prime real estate, a broadcast hub with line of sight to half the disk. Between myth and map lies why we keep pointing dishes into the glare, the hunch that busy places start conversations. The hydrogen line at 1420.405 MHz is where hunch turns discipline. Hydrogen is universal. Its 21-centimeter spin flip is a cosmological vowel. Between hydrogen and hydroxyl, the water hole opens a quiet lane from about 1.42 to 1.67 GHz. A truce band where natural static dips and regulators protect listening. If I were sending hello, I'd tuck it there. So would anyone. But nature is fluent in our imagined language. Hydrogen masers in star-forming regions amplify microwaves into needle-like lines. Turbulence sculpts scintillation that makes steady things flicker and mysterious things seem patterned. A rotating beam crossing a telescope can mimic a perfect rise and fall. Doppler drift, our motion, their motion, Earth's turn, tilts signals into slopes we mistake for signatures. The cosmos loves a good impersonation, so we do not rely on wonder. We calibrate it. Real candidates must repeat or reappear. Beams must make sense. Independent observatories must witness the same thing. We flip polarizations, null the main lobe, switch oscillators, check harmonics, and timestamp against masers and GPS. The rule is simple. What remains after we try to erase it is allowed to be interesting. Sagittarius demands patience. The line of sight is thick with plasma. Dispersion delays low frequencies, scattering smears, fast spikes. Faraday rotation spins polarization. We compensate. Coherent dedispersion, subhertz channels, polarization synthesis. But each correction is a doorway for doubt. Did we recover a signal or build one? Bias is the quietest noise of all. Our brains are Bayesian. Priors leak into posteriors with every waterfall we inspect. Two anomalies from the same constellation feel linked because stories love maps. Two dates that rhyme feel fated because stories love rhythm. I write coincidence in my notebook and box it, the way sailors painted eyes on ships, not to change the sea, but to change the sailor. Still, I keep a superstition for Sagittarius. In crowded markets, important messages ride above the babble by being simple, narrow, and repeated. The same is true here. Anything worth hearing from the Galactic Plaza will likely be tight band, low drift, and patient enough to be caught twice. That is my North Star when the display looks like poured mercury. On bad nights, the dish hears airplanes pretending to be quasars and phone towers pretending to be philosophy. We catch them by their habits. Aircraft scatter across side lobes. Cell towers have the wrong Doppler grammar. Satellites wink like metronomes, too obedient to be cosmic. Earth conspires to fool us, but provides the fingerprints to unmask the trick. People ask why we keep listening there if it is so messy, because mess is where life happens. The center is hard on planets, yes, but many stars means many experiments. If someone planted a beacon most civilizations would eventually check, the plaza makes sense, not because it's romantic, but because it's efficient. I'm not promising meanings, I'm promising methods. For the race that has everyone's attention, the two inbound wanderers that seem to carry a return address from the Archer's bow, the method matters more than the myth. We will test angles and accelerations, spectra and polarizations, cadence and context. We will ask whether a narrow line is too narrow, whether a tail is too eager, whether a drift is too tidy. The plaza gives, the plaza takes. It drowns the shy and spotlights the bold. Somewhere in that crowd, a straight thread may pass again through our beam, and I intend to have the recorder running, the checklists ready, and the doubt alive. Doubt is not the enemy, it is the lock on the vault. It lets the treasure mean something when or if we finally open the door. Before a session toward Sagittarius, I stand under the dish and listen to the wind rattle the panels. I tell myself, you are not here to be right, you are here to be careful. Then I climb the stairs, cue the pointing model, and let the plaza pour in. Somewhere above the hiss, a narrow voice may be threading through the crowd. If it speaks, I'll try to hear it twice. And if it doesn't, if all we catch are echoes, reflections, and near misses, that is still an answer. The plaza is teaching us its grammar, one false lead at a time, so that when a true sentence finally arrives, we won't need a legend to recognize it. We will have the tools, the maps, and the patience. The archer can keep his myths. We'll take the measurements and the next chance to listen closer. If one of these two interstellar racers speaks on 1420 MHz while it skims the sun and we miss it, history will file us under asleep at the dial. That is the blunt edge of the stakes. I'm not peddling panic, I'm pricing attention. Attention has a cost in time, bandwidth, and discipline, and the meter is running now. Scientifically, the window is short and non-renewable. 3i Atlas, and the newcomer will not loop back for a second try. We get a Mars sweep, a perihelion whip, an Earth-side glide, and then dimming into the dark. Each pass is a once-only laboratory: composition, thermal behavior, rotation state, outgassing physics, radio silence or not. Miss one, the experiment evaporates. Catch both with coordination, and we jump from anecdotes to a comparative sample, the first step from story to statistics. Technologically, the stakes live in the plumbing. Our arrays will dump petabytes per night. Without synchronized clocks, consistent metadata and shared file formats, we will drown in beautiful junk. Machine learning filters can either rescue a faint, structured whisper from the grass or hallucinate patterns out of airport radar and bad Ethernet. Overfit, we embarrass ourselves. Underfit, we miss the one thing that mattered. The fix is not magic. It is discipline, pre-registered pipelines, blind injections, cross-site replication, and pre-registered analyses. There is the planet to consider. Neither object threatens impact, but dust and ions care nothing for press releases. A dense tail crossing could roughen satellite surfaces, seed faint air glow, nudge GPS timing, and tickle long transmission lines with induced currents. That is not cinema, it is risk management. We need live dashboards tying solar wind, magnetosphere, satellite health, and grid status into one map, and we need clear, calm language that informs without inflaming. Politics will pry at seams we pretend are welded. Who gets time on the giant dishes? Who owns first light and first press? Do we embargo for verification or stream raw in public view? The wrong answer fractures trust. The right answer is messy cooperation, pre-registered observing plans, mirrored archives, rotating spokespeople, and the humility to say inconclusive on camera. If a nation locks data for prestige, rumor will rush in. If a lab leaps to print with shaky claims, the field pays the bill. Money steers attention. A funding spike for radios, antennas, and listen-in microsats could lift the whole search, or warp it into a gold rush of duplicated hardware and proprietary silos. We can choose standards now that keep the next decade healthy: open catalogs, interoperable protocols, and procurement that rewards reproducibility over sizzle. The social stakes cut deepest. You can't dangle first contact in front of a species raised on movies and not stir myth. Some will prey, some will panic, some will profit. Mental health lines will light. Conspiracies will metastasize around every gap in our story. My job, as a narrator who also keeps lab notes, is to hold wonder and caution in the same sentence, to say, we do not know yet, to show the work, to refuse both cynicism and hype. The tone we set in these weeks will echo for years. Ethics are not a footnote. Listening is one thing, shouting is another. I will not initiate a METI transmission while we are still learning what we are even looking at. I will respect radio quiet zones and the people who live inside them. I will not publish the names of operators or the coordinates of remote sites in ways that invite harassment, and if we find nothing, I will say so plainly, because a clean null is a kind of victory that keeps future truth believable. What if we detect a natural but exotic signature, a transient hydrogen maser, a chemical inversion that flips the CO2 to water script, a dust morphology that rewrites coma physics? Then we win anyway. Textbooks update, models sharpen, and a new subfield, call it interstellar weather, gets born on air. What if we detect structured information, drift-compensated tones, prime number timing, a waterfall that looks like it is thinking? Then we follow protocol. Multiple sites, independent hardware, open methods, time-stamped releases, publicly, and if we hear only silence, that is still a result. It sets upper bounds on transmitter power and beacon strategy. It tells us how hard they would have to try for us to notice, and how hard we must try next time. Silence is a contour, not a void. Here is my personal stake. I decide which dish to swing when the window opens, which band to favor when models diverge, which packet to discard when a glitch blooms in the waterfall. I feel the pull of bias, the seduction of patterns, the drag of fatigue at 3 a.m., so I run on checklists. I rotate analysts who disagree with me on principle. I log reasons for every decision as if future me were hostile counsel. That is how I protect the science from myself. Now the hardest stake, timing. People ask, who gets there first? Arrival is trivia. Activation is everything. A comet can beat a probe to the sun and mean nothing. A weaker object can speak first and change everything. Our clocks must be ruthless. Cadence plans must flex. If the newcomer lights up at an odd hour, I do not care whose schedule it breaks. I will pivot the array. Let me be frank. There is no safe apathy in a universe like this. There is only preparation or a footnote written by someone who did prepare. This is not about aliens. It is about competence under cosmic pressure, about whether we can stay curious and careful at once. If we keep our promises to rigor and openness, any outcome is a good outcome. Discovery, anomaly, or silence, we will have built muscle memory the species can use when the sky throws the next riddle. So breathe. Tighten the loops. Check the clocks. Teach models humility. Tell the truth faster than rumor can ferment. When the window opens, we will be awake. We will be awake. Together. Rules of the race. I promised simple rules, not a wall of algebra. Think of space as a racetrack carved into an invisible hillside. The sun is the deepest valley. Things roll faster the closer they drop. That single picture explains most of what decides our duel. 2 travelers are inbound. 3I, Atlas, is the veteran, a confirmed interstellar comet on a hyperbolic path, eccentricity greater than 1, already breathing out gas like a runner's frosty exhale. The new object is the surprise sprinter, still sketchy in our plots, photometry rising faster than we expected. Who reaches the sun first? 3 families of facts set the odds. Geometry, energy, and the small forces that bend neat equations. Geometry first. Orbits are tilted rings in 3 dimensions. Each body carries an inclination, how steep its lane, a longitude of ascending node, where the lane crosses the floor, and an argument of perihelion, where the tight curve begins. If 2 racers approach along different planes, the one with the smaller perihelion distance, Q, is favored. Shorter inside lane, shorter time to the apex. But all else equal lives only in textbooks. Energy next. Kepler whispers that areas sweep equally in equal times, which is why speeds spike near the sun. The friendliest version of the vis viva law says speed at distance r equals the square root of m times 2r 1 a. For a hyperbola, a is negative, so the second term adds speed. Translation: fall toward the valley and you accelerate hard. A tiny shrink in ER near perihelion buys a huge jump in velocity. Now the small forces, the rule benders, a comet is a sculpture of ice with a bouquet of micro-rockets. As volatiles sublimate, jets push with accelerations measured in millimeters per second squared. Small, yes, but weeks of push displace the nucleus by thousands. If the vents are uneven, thermal lag can twist the net thrust forward or backward along the track, shifting the moment of perihelion earlier or later by hours. Radiation pressure adds its shove. Sunlight carries momentum and pushes dust. The effect is stronger for smaller grains, summarized as beta, the ratio of radiation pressure to gravity. High beta dust peels into a straight tail. Low beta dust hangs close and fattens the coma. The nucleus barely notices, but the measured photocenter can drift, confusing astrometry unless you model it. Misplace the center by a fraction of an arcsecond, and your fit says the racer has sped up. Perspective tricks also bite. The fastest object on the sky plane isn't automatically the one that arrives first at perihelion. Apparent angular speed spikes when an object skims our line of sight. That is a jumbotron sprint, not a stopwatch win. Keep your eye on the energy, not the camera pan. Light time correction is another rule. We never see the present. Near the sun, we observe 8 or 9 minutes in the past. Farther out, the lag grows. In a race decided by hours, minutes matter. When I log updates, I write 2 times, observed UTC and computed barycentric dynamical time. Let me translate all of this into 3 checkpoints you can grip. Checkpoint 1, the Mars Gate. As the racers cross Mars's orbit, solar heating has woken their major volatiles. That is when non-gravitational forces usually bite hard for the first time, and when orbit solutions tighten, the arcs are longer, the geometry kinder, the covariance ellipses shrink. If the new object vents CO early, its perihelion epoch can creep earlier by a fraction of a day. If Atlas is more water-dominated, its jets may peak later and push differently. Checkpoint 2. Perihelion itself, the apex of the valley, the fastest mile. Paradoxically, the hardest to observe from Earth because the object sits inside solar glare. For instruments, the sun drowns the band and punishes frames, which is why reaches first is partly philosophical. If one racer technically crosses first, but we cannot see, ping, or listen, the practical victory belongs to the one we can measure cleanly just before and just after. Checkpoint 3. The Earth window. As each object swings in and out, there is usually a brief sweet spot in phase angle, bright enough for spectra, far enough from the sun to dodge glare, close enough to try radar. That is when we clock rotation, map jets, and test for any narrowband radio near the hydrogen line. In the end, who gets there first matters less than who opens the cleanest data gate. A few thumb rules keep me sane when the updates flood in. Halve the sun object distance and speed rises by about 2. Shave 20% off perihelion distance while keeping asymptote energy similar, and arrival can shift earlier by hours. A nucleus with a short spin period and a single dominant vent behaves like a lawn sprinkler. The net thrust vector precesses with local afternoon, adding a tiny forward kick each rotation, millimeters per second squared matter when the stopwatch runs for weeks. Uncertainty is not a flaw, it is a parameter. Early after discovery, covariances balloon. Active comets hide their hard cores inside soft light, so the centroid wanders from the true mass center. When we fit a trajectory, we must disclose that bias and either model a coma or downweight frames taken at high activity. Show the fan of futures, not a single thread, the median path wrapped by 1 sigma and 2 sigma envelopes. Honesty now prevents drama later. So who wins? The fair definition is simple: the first to reach perihelion by corrected time. The useful definition is subtler: the racer that yields the richest science inside our observing windows. The first crowns the headline, the second writes the paper. One last caveat: the rules above describe honest gravity plus ordinary comet physics. But comets sometimes cheat, gently. Oumuamua taught us that a persistent non-gravitational whisper can masquerade as intent. If either racer shows a sustained, coherent acceleration that cannot be explained by sunlight or outgassing, the rulebook changes mid-race. We will test that possibility in the next act. In every race, rules provide shape and ingenuity decides outcomes. Keep the picture simple: a valley, 2 runners, 3 checkpoints, and a handful of forces you cannot see. Hold those in mind and you can watch the line without blinking. Under the static, you may even hear the faint hiss of jets shaping destiny. And if the finish is truly a photo finish, remember, the sky judges in light minutes, not milliseconds. What matters is what physics records: momentum, heat, spectra, not what our eyes crave. Next, we put those rules against real numbers. No excuses, only trajectories measured. Here is how I run this race fairly, and how I keep myself honest while doing it. There are 2 winners to declare: the object that touches perihelion first once light time is corrected, and the object that pays out the richest scientific dividend. 1 crown for speed, 1 for truth. I won't award either without evidence that can survive a hostile audit. First, I lock the hypothesis space so it can't sprawl. Hypothesis A: purely natural dynamics and chemistry. Hypothesis B: natural object with measurable non-gravitational forces from outgassing, radiation pressure, or dust jets. Hypothesis C: technological origin or intervention. Every test I design must push at least one of these toward the exit, and none can be ruled in unless its rivals are ruled out. Second, I publish my standards before I gather the data. Tier 0 is basic reality: multi-facility detection and a stable orbit solution with uncertainties reported. Tier 1 is chemistry and spin, infrared and optical spectra with signal-to-noise above 10, and a consistent light curve tied to a rotation model. Tier 2 is physics of push and pull, a non-gravitational acceleration that matches a jet model, plus any radar or thermal constraints that bind size and mass. Tier 3 is the extraordinary bar, repeatable narrowband signals with lawful Doppler drift, or accelerations with a fixed thrust vector incompatible with outgassing, or isotopic ratios that contradict known stellar nucleosynthesis. Tier 3 claims demand independent confirmations from at least 2 teams. Third, I phase my observations so the story doesn't outrun the measurements. Pre-perihelion, from 90 to 30 days out, I stack astrometry nightly, scan for early CO and CO2, and chase any surprise activity. During planetary windows, Mars, then Earth, I go all band, JWST and big ground-based mirrors for molecules and dust, ALMA for volatiles, and the radio telescopes listening at the water hole and beyond. Near perihelion, when the sun tries to blind us, I lean on coronagraphs and solar observatories to keep the thread. Post-perihelion, I compare the before and after. Did the shape, spin, or coma change, and did the acceleration field keep a memory? Fourth, I put tools where they work best. Hubble and JWST for size, spin, and chemistry. Keck, VLT, and Gemini for quick-turn spectra. ALMA and NOEMA for cold gas. Greenbank, FAST, Meerkat, and Parkes for radio searches with full polarization. SOHO, Stereo, and Solar Orbiter for the dangerous weeks in the glare. No single instrument carries the burden. The truth needs redundancy. Fifth, I enforce cadence and transparency. I update ephemerides every 24 hours and light curves every 6 during high activity. I post spectra and line tables with calibration notes. I maintain an interference log for radio sessions and a public schedule so others can shadow me. Raw data release comes with proper metadata and a citable identifier. Sixth, I analyze like a skeptic and visualize like a teacher. I fit orbits with non-gravitational parameters, sampling posteriors by Markov chain. I model jets against spin states and sunlight geometry. I extract spectra with coma-aware apertures and run Bayesian model comparison on molecular mixtures. For radio, I sweep drift rates, test cyclostationary patterns, and stress test candidates with injections and permutations. If a feature vanishes under a new pipeline, the pipeline wins. Seventh, I set gates that trigger decisions, not tweets. Gate 1. If the difference in corrected perihelion times exceeds 6 hours at 95% confidence, I can name a speed winner. Gate 2. If the measured non-gravitational acceleration exceeds 5 times the modeled outgassing budget, I escalate suspicion. Gate 3. If a narrowband signal repeats with the geometry-predicted Doppler drift and is confirmed independently, I invoke Protocol Green, freeze the claim, notify partners, embargo 48 hours, then publish with all checks. Gate 4. If none of the above fire, I certify natural origin and pivot to origin stories written in chemistry. Eighth, I plan for everything that ruins nights. The sun's glare, schedule twilight, use coronagraphs, split hemispheres, radio noise, cross-check arrays, blacklist dirty hours, operate inside quiet zones, coma jitter moving the centroid, mask jets, adopt narrow filters, weight astrometry by seeing and phase angle. When nothing works, I say so. Ninth, I manage the narrative like a safety system. I speak in probabilities, not prophecies. I never claim technology without Tier 3 and replication. I keep a dashboard showing confidence, not certainty. If I am wrong, the archive will show how and when, and someone else will be right faster. Finally, a promise. If the drift we see is not a jet, then we are hearing something, and we will listen harder. Night by night, the race tightens. The latest ephemerides drop into my screen like twin heartbeats. 2 curves bending toward the sun, their perihelion clocks separated by less than a coffee break. Light time corrections shave seconds, relativistic tweaks trim the rest. If you squint, the finish line blurs into one. Then a twitch. Buried in the cometary hiss, during a Mars behind geometry, a faint, narrow ridge traces the spectrum. Not a signal, not yet. A nudge that dares me to breathe wrong. Meanwhile, the chemistry refuses to behave. Carbon dioxide roars while water lags. Nickel sings without iron answering. The spin solution flips between 2 poles like a coin that will not land. Every dataset offers an alibi, and every alibi creates a new suspect. I hold to the rules we set at the start. Repeatability, cross-facility confirmation, geometry-consistent Doppler, power budgets that make sense, no miracles allowed. None of those gates trip, yet. Restraint feels like standing on the brake while the world leans on the gas. Time compresses. Solar glare opens a window shaped like a keyhole. The Earth approach listening net spools up, operators rehearsing the handoffs in whispered midnights. We have one last clean night before the sun swallows both objects in its brightness. This is the fork. Spend the most precious hours on natural models, jets, vents, shards, dust, or point the biggest dishes at a maybe. Either choice risks missing history. I look again at the drift curve, at the ghost in the spectrum, at the clock no one can stop. Where do we point the world's ears? Here's my line in the sand. We split the night, split the risk, split the fear. Half the array hunts physics, half hunts intent. If either whispers, we pivot the whole sky. If neither does, the silence will speak loudly. We reboot the array at midnight UTC, 1 clock for the planet. I watch the digits roll to 00 and feel the control room hold its breath. Power rails steady, fans settle into an ocean sound. The net comes alive, time first. We lock GPS and PTP, cross-check rubidium, and push net time out to every dish and camera. Phase offsets drop under microseconds, the chorus of locked tiles across the wall. From now on, every photon and every bit will share the same time-stamped heartbeat. Noise, second. We hunt gnats before we hunt the tiger. Starlink, radars, air traffic, campus Wi-Fi, microwave in the night kitchen, profiled, mapped, fenced. We write adaptive notches and train the classifier on last week's junk. The spectrogram at 1420 MHz goes clean, a dark river cut through static. If a whisper arrives, it will not drown. Coverage third, radio, optical, infrared, solar monitors. Green Bank and Meerkat rake the waterhole and its shoulders. Fast leans for faint breaths. CCDs on the ridge pull light curves at millisecond cadence. Thermal imagers measure heat that shouldn't be there. Coronagraphs watch the sun's bright mask for dust and plasma tricks. The sky grid no longer has holes, only handoffs. People too realign. We split watches by discipline, not by ego. Radio has the floor midnight to 4. Optics tags in. IR takes dawn. We write the responsibility map in fat marker on glass. Who calls whom, how fast, for what thresholds. The incident chat pings a clear test. Drill, drill, drill. 3 replies. 1 voice. Good. Windows matter. 6 weeks. 6 names. Chemistry. Dynamics. Radio alpha. Mars window. Thermal truths. Beta sweep. We print them above the door so even the tired remember the plan. Outside, 2 racers cut arcs through our gravity well. 3I, Atlas, and the new object, fast and late. Our job is not to decide the winner. Our job is to record the race with no alibi left behind. Data wants a home. We give it one. Fits, PSR fits, VO event. Checksums on ingest. Barycentric corrections applied on the way in, not as an afterthought. The dashboard shows latency and quality scores live. When a plot looks beautiful, we distrust it first, then we believe it. Every pretty picture earns a paper trail. Alarms need manners. We make 3. Ping is for candidates. Call is for multi-site confirmations. Page is for waking the world. Nobody jumps the ladder. Nobody hoards the ladder, either. If you think maybe, you ping. If 2 think likely, you call. If numbers sing and the drift matches the ephemeris inside 1 sigma, we page. But we page the data, not the dream. We keep 1 ghost in the room. August 1977. The wow. That never came back. We do not worship it. We study it. Repeat immediately, or it does not exist. Split beam, 2 polarizations, mirrored backends. If the signal can pass those gates, it deserves our fear. Failure rehearsals are the price of luck. We pull a fiber and watch the network reroute. We inject a fake carrier to make the pipeline blush. We flood the cluster with decoys and ask the machine to say no. Everything breaks during a drill, so it will not break during the night. The sun can still ruin us. A Cape 8 storm will blind half the plan. We set southern backups, northern backups, and 1 stubborn station that records even when the world hisses. Weather will steal the optical nights. Fine. Radio will carry the weight, and IR will read heat through thin cloud. Standards sharpen courage. 2 independent stations for any radio claimant. Repeat inside 24 hours. Drift rate consistent with the orbit solution within error bars. For optics, 2 nights of phase-coherent light curves. For IR, thermal models that close inside 10%. If we miss any of these, we log, we learn, we refuse to mythologize. At 0023, the room quiets into purpose. Keys stop clacking, screens stop arguing. Outside, the sky is the same as yesterday, only we are different. All stations green, net time holds. If a whisper comes, we catch it. If silence holds, we measure that too. Either way, the race starts, and the array is awake. I built the grid the way a pilot builds trust with a cockpit. One switch, one gauge, one quiet heartbeat at a time. We didn't need slogans. We needed clocks that agreed to within a breath, dishes that nodded in the same direction, and a plan for when the sky decided to misbehave. If there was going to be a race to the sun, then we would be the finish line camera and the timing chip, the witness that never blinked. First came the constellation of ears. Fast would give us raw sensitivity, Greenbank our northern anchor, Meerkat, the nimble interferometric eye, the VLA our sculptor of structure, and a chorus of smaller dishes to stitch the seams. On the optical side, survey cameras would sweep the wide field, while high-speed photometers caught staccato glints. Near-infrared spectrographs waited to taste the heat. In orbit, JWST and Hubble held scarce time slots like golden tickets, and solar coronagraphs kept watch where daylight swallows stars. All that metal means nothing if the seconds slip, so we disciplined time until it behaved. GPS-disciplined oscillators kept our observatories in step. Rubidium and cesium standards carried the count through storms and outages. Every photon that hit a sensor got time-stamped, then carried home to the solar system barycenter so Earth's wobble wouldn't fake a drift. One heartbeat for the planet, one ledger for the sky. Pointing is a promise. We fed the latest astrometry into our schedulers, letting JPL's solutions narrow chaos to a cone. The new object earned a Monte Carlo bouquet of possible paths. 3i Atlas got the veteran's lane. We pre-baked slew plans with margins for wind, ice, and human nerves. Then we taught the system to listen to itself. When a tracked centroid deviated by a whisper, the next facility nudged its aim before a human could frown. Calibration is the ritual that makes faith into evidence. Radio receivers sang to themselves with noise diodes. Arrays traced band passes and squared away polarization. Optical teams chased flats, darks, and biases. IR instruments soaked against hot and cold loads. We did this even when it felt boring, because boring is how you earn the right to be astonished. RFI is the city noise of the universe. We mapped every habitual offender, aircraft radar, passing satellites, the microwave that warms midnight noodles, and taught our filters to notch and duck without chewing on the signal. We audited our own power lines, sealed leaks, grounded racks, and moved fragile front ends into Faraday quiet. It is amazing how loud humanity sounds when you ask the sky to whisper. Coverage was built as a relay, not a sprint. We named windows like chapters, chemistry, dynamics, radio alpha, Mars window, thermal truths, beta sweep, and stitched them across longitudes. When Chile went to sleep, South Africa woke. When West Virginia hit dawn, China still had room to listen. Handshakes were machine-readable and human-legible, stamped and archived so any future argument could walk the chain and see exactly where the baton passed. The data firehose needed a throat and a memory. FPGAs and GPUs split, channeled, and beamed the spectrum into thousands of 1 Hz lanes. Lossless compression kept the bits honest. We mirrored raw packets to 2 continents, signed them with hashes on ingest, and kept an append-only log that did not care about reputations, only truth. Our schema was dull on purpose. Dull survives. We wrote our alert ladder in red marker and then turned it into code. A ping is a candidate. A call means 2 sites agree. A page goes wide to the world. Promotion requires a tight set of virtues. The right drift for the right orbit. Sensible polarization, repeatability under changing geometry. False positives get a funeral with a log number and a lesson. Operations needed to sound like a string quartet, not a drum solo. Roles were explicit, shifts humane, and a red team injected decoys so we wouldn't mistake a trick for a miracle. Our incident channel was the single source of truth. Decisions took stamps and timestamps. When someone begged for sleep, someone else took their chair. There is no glory in heroics if the data breaks. Security and ethics were not footnotes. We kept chain of custody from first photon to final plot, embargoed until replication cleared, and held to a quiet transmitter policy. If the universe wanted a conversation, it would not need us to shout. On the whiteboard above my desk, I wrote a simple math bite. 30 kilometers per second at the hydrogen line is roughly 140 hertz of shift. The change in that drift, if nothing is pushing, should be only a few hertz per second. We tuned channels to 1 hertz and let integrations span 1 to 30 seconds. It feels like fishing. It is really metrology. On the night we armed the grid, the dashboards turned a constellation of grey tiles to green. Clocks locked. Band passes flattened. RFI fell away like a curtain. Somewhere between Sagittarius and the Sun, 2 travelers moved. We did not know which would arrive first. But we knew, with the stubborn confidence of well-made instruments, that when the sky chose, we would be listening. And if nothing spoke, no pips, no glints, no impossible turns, we would still own the map of our own patience, a complete negative, a photograph of silence proving we were ready for the next question the cosmos could ask of us. Baseline first, same distance, same rules, chemistry keeps score. That's the mantra I repeat as we spin up the first coordinated observing window for 3I, Atlas, and the so-called new object. No intrigue, no speculation, just molecules, lines, and light. We hold both targets near the same heliocentric distance, clamp exposure strategies, match aperture footprints, and let the spectra speak before heating scrambles the story. I split my screen in 2, left pane riding the infrared, right pane living in optical and millimeter. JWST's NIR spec and MIRI deliver the volatile backbone, water at 2.7 3.1 microns, carbon dioxide at 4.26, carbon monoxide at 4.7. HST handles UV fragments. On the ground, VLT's X-shooter and Keck's NIRES stitch the visible to NIR gap, while ALMA chases HCN, HNC and CH3OH at millimeter bands. 2 modes, always. Deep integrations for faint lines, and rapid cadence sequences to catch spasms in the coma. We cut along the suntail axis, then perpendicular through the photometric center, so jets or anisotropy don't trick us into fake ratios. Polarimetry runs alongside. Dust tells a parallel truth. Mid-IR checks the 10-micron silicate feature and a PAH shoulder near 11.2. We aren't chasing spectacular, we're building a baseline ledger. The first volleys come quick. 3I Atlas shows CO2 roaring early, a clean 4.26 micron band that refuses to wait for perihelion theatrics. Water is present but subdued. The synthetic fits keep favoring roughly 8:1 CO2 to H2O at this distance. Native comets often invert that. Could be real, could be aperture bias, could be thermal stratification. I flag it, not crown it. The new object answers with a different accent. Its CO2 is robust, yes, but water punches harder than expected for the same solar input. On the triangle plot, H2O, CO2, CO at the corners. 3I Atlas sits toward the CO2 vertex. New object drifts closer to the H2O side with a CO spur that refuses to be shy. 2 racers, 2 fuel maps. In the optical, the old friends check in. CN at 3880. O, the C2 swan bands, faint C3. OI 5577 and 6300 whisper about photodissociation in the coma's skin. Sodium D glows in a tight core, then stretches into an extended tail that outlives the dust. Then the metal twist. Nickel emission lines peaking above noise for 3I Atlas, without the usual iron companions. The Ni lines persist when I change extraction apertures. Fe stays shy. Numbers matter more than adjectives. We push the Hazer model through both comae, solve for production rates Q H2O, QCO2, QCO. ALMA pins down HCN and a whiff of CH3OH. The new object's HCN-H2O ratio nudges high relative to Jupiter family benchmarks. 3I Atlas lands outside Oort cloud medians for CO2 richness. I color the cells, green for ordinary, amber for unusual, red for anomalous. Dust refuses to be background. Polarization versus phase angle sketches, different grain populations, 3I, Atlas trends steeper, hinting at smaller, more pristine particles. New object flattens, as if compact grains or mantles are damping the response. Mid-IR shows an amorphous silicate bump for both, but only new object flashes a faint crystalline shoulder. Thermal continua fail with single-size grains. Porous fractal aggregates tame the residuals. We reach for isotopes, the deep proof. DH via HDO in water fragments, 13C, 12C in CN, 15N, 14N if the gods of signal bless us. The error bars are tyrants at this distance, but even tyrants blink. Preliminary fits place 3I Atlas DH above terrestrial ocean values. New object leans closer to Earth-like. I don't celebrate, I annotate. Quality control is a character in this story. Telluric standards march across the logs. Fringes in NIR are hunted and removed. Slit losses are modeled against seeing. We cross-calibrate with aperture photometry. Every pipeline commit gets a checksum. If a claim survives that gauntlet, it has earned its verbs. Now the traps. CO masquerading as CO2 if the continuum fit is lazy. Aperture-dependent mixing in asymmetric Comé. Jets can fake global chemistry if you're not watching. Solar phase angle alters polarization in ways that mimic composition. We rotate, repeat, interleave nights, and watch the clockwork sky shuffle the same experiment under new geometry. If a feature is real, it will persist. By the end of the window, the baseline says this: 3I Atlas is an overachieving CO2 machine with nickel that arrives before iron. New object is wetter, dust flatter, and chemically more solar neighborhood. Both carry surprises, neither is a twin. My anomaly ledger lists 4 items: CO2 os H2O, +3 for 3I Atlas at large distance, Ni without Fe above 5 sigma, a sodium tail longer than dust, and a tentative DH divergence between the two. I take a breath and pin a note to future me. Do not marry the baseline. Heating will edit these spectra. Rotation will swing jets into and out of view. What looks alien at 3 astronomical units can look ordinary at 2, and the reverse. Still, patterns are brave enough to peak. If CO2 dominates this early for 3I Atlas, subsurface layering or exotic ices may be closer to daylight than we expected. If nickel keeps singing while iron stays quiet, grain chemistry or temperature thresholds are writing a script we haven't rehearsed. If new objects' water stays ahead while dust polarization stays flat, we may be watching 2 very different crusts surrender their volatiles on the same stage. Baseline complete. The chemistry has taken attendance and recorded 4 students whispering in the back row. Next we see how acceleration, sunlight and time turn whispers into confessions now. Speed in this race to the sun is a number, not a feeling. A streaky trail can look fast yet be close. Angular motion blends geometry with Earth's spin. To decide who truly gets there first, I track heliocentric distance versus time, compare predicted perihelion epochs from a clean gravitational fit, and watch for the tiny self-propulsive lies that sunlight writes into comet orbits. I run 2 tapes in parallel. Astrometry is the ruler, positions tied to Gaia, night after night, then an orbit I can propagate. Photometry is the thermometer, how bright in which colors, at which phase angles, and how brightness changes with rotation, dust release, and outbursts. I let the tapes braid only where physics demands because brightness can bias positions and positions can mislead brightness corrections. Surveys feed us astrometry, follow-ups sharpen it. Modest telescopes deliver cadence, big mirrors deliver signal to noise. Polarimetry frames each sequence because scattered light orientation whispers grain size. Near the Sun, space telescopes take the baton. Hubble for an invariant point spread, SOHO and stereo for heliospheric context, JWST when infrared lines matter. With positions in hand, I build a gravitational baseline. Planetary perturbations and a small relativistic tweak get folded in. Outdrop osculating elements and nominal perihelion times for both races, with uncertainties that widen into a fan. I clone each orbit thousands of times, sampling the covariance, and watch the cloud evolve. The cloud tells me where one more measurement will slash ignorance the most. Then I hunt non-gravitational acceleration. I add Marsden parameters, A1 radial, A2 transverse, A3 normal, tied to a sublimation law, GR. Water ice laws rarely wake beyond 3 astronomical units. CO and CO2 can. If an A2 term persists across independent windows and its sign refuses to flip with station waiting, belief climbs. Better still, if spectroscopic gas production rises exactly when the fit demands extra push, confidence follows. False positives breed easily, mismodeled stars, color refraction, and coma-dragged centroids masquerading as thrust. So I model the image before I model the orbit. A coma often follows a one-polar surface brightness profile smoothed by seeing. I fit a nucleus plus coma point spread, measure how the centroid shifts with aperture and seeing, and decide whether I'm tracking the body or its halo. If centroids wander with weather, I inflate errors and mark those positions photocenter in the fit. Only a stable core earns nucleus quality status. Photometry becomes the metronome that times rotation and activity. First, I remove the phase function using HG-style corrections adapted to coma. Residuals go into Lomskargel and clean, hunting double-peaked signatures of elongated shapes. Early on, both objects may show crisp periods. As they warm, amplitudes damp under the veil of outgassing, and periods smear as jets torque the spin. If precession creeps in, a slow envelope rides the light curve. I flag that as a torque diagnostic. Phase angle is its own trap. Forward scattering can rocket apparent brightness at small elongations, a geometric mirage. I map polarization versus phase to cross-check dust models. High polarization at steep phase angles points to fluffy grains that feel radiation pressure more strongly. Those same grains curve the tail. Sindine synchrone maps convert curvature into V, the ratio of radiation pressure to gravity, and thus into grain sizes. Outbursts are saboteurs of clean dynamics. A sudden gas release brightens the comet and kicks the photocenter. Minutes later, astrometry shows an OC kink. I pair every photometric spike with orbit-fit residuals and with gas lines from ALMA or high-dispersion optical spectra. If timestamps lock, I ascribe the kink to physics rather than software. How do I keep score? 3 dashboards. First, heliocentric distance RT for each body versus time, with a long-track separation marked in millions of kilometers. Second, the difference in predicted perihelion epoch, DT peri, with credible intervals that expand or shrink as new data land. Third, orbital energy 1A and specific angular momentum h, which tell me who is deeper in the sun's well. Any deviation from the gravitational baseline gets translated into an equivalent dV. That sets an upper bound on any hidden thrust. Cross-validation is compulsory. I run n-body ensembles seeded from posteriors, inject synthetic A1, A2, A3 patterns, and ask whether our cadence and noise would have caught them. In parallel, I forward model brightness for a rotating, jetting nucleus to test whether a demanded A2 has a plausible photometric footprint. If the dynamics require thrust the photometry cannot support, the model, not the comet, is guilty. Failure loves corners. Color term errors between telescopes, fake secular brightening. We clamp nightly 0 points with standard stars. Short exposures invite shutter timing bias. We tether clocks to GPS and audit logs. Seasonal gaps alias rotation. We bridge hemispheres so the light curve never flatlines. Near conjunction, differential chromatic refraction bullies centroids. We correct it or discard data. By week's end, I publish a race bulletin, updated orbits, dot peri shifts, any detected A2, and the confidence that ties dynamics to chemistry. Sometimes the leaderboard flips on a single night. When it does, I ask one question out loud. Was that real physics, or just a trick of light? Either answer changes the standings and sharpens what we hear. I call it Radio Campaign Alpha, and the control room answers with a nod that feels like ignition. We are done waiting for luck. Tonight we listen on purpose. Not a scan, a hunt. 2 racers dive toward the inner system, and if either one speaks, sings, or even clears a digital throat, we plan to hear it. I sign the schedule, lock the clocks, and tell the network to breathe in. Rule 1 is simple. Point, track, verify, repeat. Rule 2 is kinder. Share the sky so no single failure can break the chain. Rule 3 remembers humble patience. We start where every radio-literate mind would start, the hydrogen line at 1420-4058 MHz. We bracket it by several megahertz, combing with channels 1 Hz wide and micro sweeps at tenths of a hertz. Add the hydroxyl quartet at 1612, 1665, 1667 and 1720 MHz, because water whispers in pairs. Then we open the wide country from 1 to 12 GHz, hunting clean carriers, swept tones, spread spectrum bravado, and the stubborn tricks engineers use when they do not wish to be jammed. Every tone gets Doppler attention and barycentric polish, so motion reveals intention, not confusion. We listen hard. Low band comes next, the unruly end of the party, 100 to 300 MHz. Here live plasma size, cyclotron fuss, and the strange Russell comets make when the solar wind tears at newborn atmospheres. For daring friends, we add a millimeter pilot from 86 to 230 GHz with an ALMA-class partner, chasing Marsers and heat signatures that could be natural or profoundly intentional. All bands record full Stokes polarization because a clever transmitter might hide in handedness. If a tone flips left to right on a clockwork beat, we will not miss the drum. Assets assemble like a global choir. Fast leans its enormous ear. Green Bank holds the hydrogen line with monk patience. Parks brings reach and history. Meerkat and the Very Large Array stitch coincidence with long baselines. The Allen Telescope Array keeps watch while others sleep. The Deep Space Network helps during the bright weeks when the sun bullies the sky. On the ground, 1,000 software radios in backyards record waterfalls and send them upstream. Every dish takes the same oath: time sync, pointing check, calibration on hot and cold loads, then silence before the storm. We breathe, then begin. Pointing is choreography. We feed fresh ephemerides into the controllers and let the computers apply barycentric corrections so Doppler does not fool us. We search drift rates from -10 to +10 Hz per second with fine steps. Targets go on, off targets follow, back to on, then a mirror tune to catch symmetric ghosts from side lobes. Multi-beam logic demands agreement across dishes before anyone cheers. The procedure is unromantic on purpose. Romance is how noise becomes myth, and myth is how hard data quietly dies. So we count, confirm, switch, repeat, and write everything down. Every time, cadence rides the racers. The Mars flyby earns a 72-hour rolling watch with handoffs between hemispheres. Perihelion is a glare factory, but radios do not blink, so we lean on space assets and deep nulls. Earth minimum distance commands continuous nights with 6-hour relays and emergency reserves. The Jupiter geometry window gets a page of its own because a giant magnetosphere makes weird music, and we must know which song is ours. Every window carries a risk log, weather alternates, maintenance freezes, and a backup site that knows it is the backup. Nobody leaves the board unwatched. We run 4 observing modes in parallel. Narrowband comb for 1 Hz needles. Ultrafine near the hydrogen line for the difficult genius who wants to be found only by the patient. Wideband channelized spectroscopy at 3 kHz bins for swept tones and lazy chirps. And a burst catcher that drinks sub-millisecond spectra in greedy gulps because some messages prefer the language of lightning. All modes record full polarization and timestamps that respect leap seconds. If a tone pre-compensates Doppler, carries frames, or flips handedness on schedule, the log will shout. We will hear it anyway. Eventually, the data covenant is sacred. Raw, complex voltages roll for 10 seconds around anything that pokes above the floor. Everything else lands as signed waterfalls with metadata and checksums. RFI will try to win, so we geofence aircraft and satellites, blacklist repeat offenders, and auto-park screaming bands. A candidate must show a sky-shaped Doppler curve and pass an on-off dance. Triggers come in 3 colors: a blip and a page, a multi-station chorus, or a structured voice that writes its own rules. At 0211 UTC, a line rises, splits, holds, then dies. We exhale and listen harder. Mars climbs like a copper coin on my scope, and every clock in the room agrees. The window is open. We've been pacing toward this geometry for months, the hours when both interstellar racers skim the red planet's sphere of influence. If anything artificial rides along, gravity or curiosity might make it speak here. I keep telling the team the same line because it's true. The Mars window is where physics squeezes secrets. Our plan is tight. We center 1420.405 MHz, throw combs across +3 MHz with subhertz bins and sweep sidebands for harmonics. We record full Stokes polarization. We run an on-off-on cadence against a sky patch trailing each object by 2 degrees. A real signal must die in the off. Fast takes the deep stare. Greenbank eats bandwidth. Parkes and Meerkat shadow for instant confirmation. The VLA splits duty, imaging with part of the array, beamforming with the rest. Hubble and JWST divide the chemistry. The geometry helps. Baseline between Earth and Mars turns Doppler into a truth test. A genuine signal must drift with the two-planet dance. Parallax gives depth. Phase angle stretches dust into relief, so jets write lines we can read. The trap is Mars itself, bright, twitchy, loud. We mask known emitters, train the classifier on a year of Martian RFI. At TO3 Etoile, we rehearse at full power. The waterfall is clean, calibrators sit. Greenbank locked, fast nominal, Parkes tracking, VLA phased. Later pings, I answer one word. Go. The storm that follows is held in place by math. Every 10 minutes we toggle pointing. Every hour we sweep 112 GHz plus a low band at 200 MHz because nature loves to hide at edges. Any candidate above threshold triggers a raw voltage dump. 10 seconds of sky we can rewind and interrogate. I watch the hydrogen line like a lifeguard. Chemistry takes the stage. JWST tastes CO2 at 4.3 and H2O across 2.7, 3.1 If the carbon dioxide dominance returns, it should return here. We push nickel versus iron again because our last campaign teased Ni without Phi. Hubble chases OH in ultraviolet. Ground-based spectrographs chase CN and C2. If the coma wakes early at Mars, that's a clue, not just spectacle. Dust is the quiet saboteur. AFR climbs, stalls, lies. Color slopes swing, saying, small grains here, bigger there. The tail kinks as solar wind shoves and Mars's weak gravity pinches. Photometry ticks like a metronome. If rotation shifts, jets are pushing. If rotation locks, something cohesive lurks. Astrometry residuals are my oracle. A millisecond off can be outgassing, or intention-wearing outgassing like a mask. The first hour is a pilot's favorite kind of boring. Then a line rises at 1420.458 MHz on fast. Razor-thin, 3 sigma, a faint doublet, then gone. Leader tags it, canned Mars A001. 9 seconds later, Greenbank catches the same line, offset exactly by geometry. Meerkat whispers, present, weak. The VLA's beam-formed ear is clean, the chat goes quiet. We ride the script, on-off on. In the off, the line dies. In the return on, it lives thinner. Polarization leans circular and then tips, as if a coin were wobbling to rest. The Doppler drift matches Atlas within forecast and misses the new object by a hair. Hair is not a statistic, so I slide the drift against Earth-Mars kinematics and watch the curve lie down where it should. It's seductive and therefore suspect. We widen the net. Level 1 detection, 2 facilities, right direction, right drift. Level 2 demands repeatability, parallax consistency, independent backends. The candidate limps into Level 2. Hubble finds nothing odd at OH. Keep looking in professional dialect. JWST whispers a bump in CO2 and a smaller lift in H2O. Nickel peaks. Iron stays coy. I file it under interesting, not decisive. Mars intervenes at the worst time. For 4 minutes, the line rides the skirt of Martian clutter. The classifier screams, the protocol smiles, we stand down. When the mess passes, the line returns, narrower, lower. Maven logs a modest uptick in pickup ions, suggestion, not proof. TGO's grazing occultation slices a fatter-than-last-week shadow from the coma. I write possible jet and circle it twice. We push for parallax. VLA and Meerkat triangulate, pinning the apparent origin to a box that overlaps Atlas's ephemeris and misses the new object by 2 error bars. It's not a verdict, but it's the night's first number that feels like evidence instead of drama. Astrometry residuals refuse to be interesting. Kepler wins by boredom. If someone is steering, they're kinder to equations than to us. Halfway through the window, the candidate flares. The split returns. Now the upper thread drifts faster than the lower, a pattern that smells like imperfect motion compensation or a quirky Marser. Call it, leader says, which means make the decision you can live with at sunrise. I keep it at level 2. We need a third clean facility in step before we invite the wider world. Restraint is a kind of courage. I speak to the mic we use for timestamps and late-night confessions. If you're noise, thank you. If you're nature, keep singing. If you're someone, we are listening. It's theatre, and it's honest. Our disclosure policy lives taped to my monitor, next to the numbers I hope I never dial. By T+03 under 12, the chemistry is sharper. CO2 outruns H2O again, not 8-1, but not ordinary. Nickel persists. Iron remains a rumour. Dust is awake. The light curve suggests rotation barely nudged by torques. Forensics, not fireworks. Meanwhile, the radio candidate survives 3 on-off cycles, an instrumental swap, and 1 insult from the RFI database. Level 2 holds. Almost is a scientist's favorite mirage. I treat it like a cliff edge. Mars falls away, and the window exhales. We close the volt dump valve and begin the slow work, barycentric corrections, microsecond time alignment, polarization leakage modeling, cross-correlation of raw streams. I sign file names like a sailor signs a log. The room relaxes into the low jokes of people who didn't break the universe tonight. Whatever we heard or wanted to hear at Mars sets the table for the sun. Perihelion will be meaner, brighter, stingier. If a racer carries a transmitter, heat may wake it. If it's only ice and dust, heat will tell us that too, with a silence as final as a verdict. The candidate light stays yellow on my screen as the house lights rise. I let it glow. And then I write the only question worth carrying to the next shift, in ink on the page where I keep questions I'm willing to be wrong about. Did we just record a coin flip, or the first hello? The leak arrives at 0614, a screenshot shaped like a guillotine. A mislabeled spectrogram, our internal sandbox plot, has slipped into the wild without its caveats. By 0620 my phone is a strobe. By 0630 a chyron yells, "Alien radio found?" I breathe and walk into comms. Level 2 candidate only, leader reminds me. 3 backends, 2 polarizations, 0 consensus. We draft a holding line that says everything and nothing. Detection, under review, replication underway, no evidence of hazard. The statement goes out. It buys us 13 minutes of quiet. Then the narrative machines spin up. A senator promises hearings to protect the public. Another demands open data now or never. A third floats a pause near perihelion until safety is certain, as if certainty were a switch you flip. Markets turn our sky into a ticker. Antenna vendors spike, launch stocks rip, then crater on a rumor that our candidate vanished. In our control room, the only thing vanishing is patience. We call a briefing. No hype, just scaffolding. We show the on-off-on cadence, the drift that matches neither Earth's rotation nor an LEO breeze, the way noise loves to cosplay as meaning. I draw the line between level 2 and level 3 with a thick black marker. Independent replication, matched drift correction, parallax confirmation, polarization coherence. Reporters lean in. One asks if I believe in aliens. I say I believe in error bars and in what survives them. Diplomacy arrives. An allied deep space network wants priority on our clean hours. A rival agency announces an emergency microprobe to chase the new object. A press release, not a mission. We negotiate window swaps like surgeons trading operating rooms. Every concession feels expensive because our currency is darkness. Outside, the city is learning the plot. A classroom streams our live spectrogram and cheers at every spike. A muralist paints Atlas and the new object as twin arrows aimed at the sun. A small protest forms at the gate, handmade signs asking us to tell the truth, as if truth were being hoarded in the server room under lock. Security flags botnets, spoofing our plots. The copies look almost right, which is the most dangerous kind of wrong. We answer with radical transparency, raw snippets, time tags, calibration files, null reports pushed fast when candidates fall apart. We credit amateurs who catch real issues. We caption every briefing, translate threads, and hold open office hours for educators. Hype is tempting, discipline is kinder. The senator's staff calls again. Testimony before perihelion. Leader mouths no. I hesitate. The budget that buys our nights lives downstream of their microphones. I draft a conditional yes, will appear if our windows remain untouched, and if the hearing records our evidentiary ladder without turning it into confetti. Evening brings a new bruise on the spectrum. Not at hydrogen proper, but at a rational offset that factors cleanly with Atlas's measured spin period. The line is narrow, patient, and wrong in exactly the way that makes your stomach float. We rerun drifts, rotate feeds, cold start back ends. It stays. I can feel cameras orbiting the glass behind me, waiting for a face to put on a frequency. I press my palms to the console to ground myself. The rule is simple. 3 independent confirmations, or we hold. The world wants a headline. The sky wants silence. I clear my throat and choose the sky. We embargo the plot, lock the schedule, and widen the net for replication. Who gets there first? A producer texts. I look up at the sun that will decide the question and type back. The evidence, if we let it. The nickel line cut through my spectrum like a razor, bright and in the dark. Iron, its usual shadow, was nowhere. I stared at the Echelle display and felt the room tilt as a simple fact refused to fit. Night 1, Chile, UVEs. Night 2, Hawaii, Hires. Different hemispheres, the same nickel where iron should echo. Either the comet was rewriting our thermochemistry or my pipeline was lying. I reran everything and the line refused to move. I walked the team through the checklist. Tellurics modeled with A stars, blaze corrected, ghosts hunted, flats redone, sky frames rotated, calibration lamps cross-checked on standards. The nickel held its shape, its centroid steady, its equivalent width rising as heliocentric distance fell. Far I stayed below detection. Phase 2 teased the noise floor, then retreated. We injected iron to assure recovery and caught it. If this was a flaw, it was unusually disciplined. By dawn I could hear the internet sharpening knives. Nickel without iron means aliens, right? I recorded a calm explainer instead. Missing lines do not equal megastructures. Chemistry can be lopsided, excitation can be tricksy, pumping can fake abundance, instruments can be wrong. Then I killed notifications, opened a new notebook, and let the clock remind me that perihelion would not care about our narratives. Either the line obeyed physics, or we were being fooled in a new way. Nickel has more ways to be free than iron if the host minerals differ. If the nucleus is laced with sulfides that let nickel volatilize early, while iron sits locked in refractory phases, you get a head start in the coma. Under a CO2-rich, H2O-poor outgassing regime, nickel carbonyl can form and ferry metal outward, while iron sulks in solids. That is chemistry, not conspiracy. But chemistry makes predictions, and predictions face clocks. So we turned hypothesis into a schedule that could break it. We built a cross-longitudinal relay, Chile to the Canaries to Mauna Kea to Sutherland, 2 nights per week, cadence bracketing the Mars pass. UVES chased Ni-I and Ni-2. Hires sat on Fe-I and Fe-2. STIS probed the near UV where iron often hides. NIR spec watched the CO2 bands that might be the metal's chauffeur. If nickel was being pumped, brightness should ride with radial velocity and phase angle. If chemistry ruled, it should track CO2 and ultraviolet flux. Either way, time would choose. The first analog tests lit the lab like a supernova. We laser-desorbed powdered troilite and pentlandite under CO2 flows and measured release curves with a time-of-flight spectrometer. Nickel peaked earlier than iron when the matrix was porous and warmed quickly. Add a whisper of water and iron woke, loud. It wasn't proof of our comet's heart, but it whispered plausibility into the noise. When we added ultraviolet, the nickel spike sharpened, and our room of skeptics raised eyebrows. On the 3rd week, the new object slid into our window with a spectrum that looked like a cousin, faint nickel, fickle iron, lines breathing with heliocentric speed. At 0217 UT, a broad nickel feature flared and faded in 7 minutes like a city light behind fog. We checked air mass, winds, and the guide star. The line's polarization shifted as the phase angle changed, hinting at fluorescent pumping from sunlight. I felt the story turn by a degree, enough to matter, not enough to conclude anything bold. That night I wrote the nickel protocol: pre-register which lines count, fix detection thresholds before we look, blind the subteams, publish reductions and calibration frames in an open vault, and refuse to compare nickel to iron without phase and velocity controls. Then I added a clause. Claims of technology require 3 independent pillars: persistent nickel without iron across geometry, non-gravitational acceleration inconsistent with outgassing, and isotopic ratios that disobey stellar norms. Perihelion crept closer, activity swelled. Dust made the continuum lumpy and mean, so we swapped in non-parametric backgrounds and remeasured. Nickel still stood like a lighthouse. Iron blinked, then dark. NIR spec showed CO2 roaring. The correlation tightened. If ultraviolet drove pumping, a narrowband filter should mute nickel. It did, but not enough. If chemistry drove transport, nickel should track the CO2 to water ratio. It did, almost too well. The plot steepened, then curved into a plateau. The team started to split along familiar tectonic lines. The cautious wanted more nights and better SNR. The bold wanted to draft an abstract with anomalous above the fold. I opened the dashboard we had promised the public, a badge that read, "Where's the iron?" and a live graph of nickel to CO2 versus phase angle. The curve bent upward and settled like a held breath. On the last clear night before the sun swallowed our sightline, nickel hit a peak. Iron stayed rumor, for now. I muted the room and listened to the nickel very quietly. The line appears at 1420, 455 MHz, like a needle through velvet, a streak skating down our waterfall plot as 3i Atlas and the newcomer align in geometry. I tag the span, lock the back end and say, on-off cadence now. The array nods, on target, off target, back on. The carrier pops in and out like a heartbeat. First sanity, dual polarization. I flip to full Stokes, watching I, Q, U, V breathe. Artificial transmitters hold their posture, sky signals roll with parallactic angle. Here, the vector barely flinches. Second sanity, multi-beam logic. A true point in space should step beam to beam as Earth turns. This thing lights several beams at once, faint in the skirts, bright dead center. My pen hovers above the notebook, not ready to write RFI. Not ready to write hello. Doppler truth test. I fit the topocentric drift, then the barycentric model that predicts what a transmitter at the comet should do. The slopes refuse to shake hands. One is tidy, the other sulks. I try a second-order term. The mismatch grows louder like a key that almost fits, then grinds. I feel the room's temperature drop. Geography decides. I throw a ping to Green Bank, Parkes, Meerkat. Same frequency, same window. If it's from the sky, 2 hemispheres will agree with light-time grace. Green Bank sees a hint, Parkes sees silence. Meerkat reports nothing but local combs. My stomach steadies and sinks at the same time. Spectral fingerprints next. Phase noise. Sidebands. Comb teeth. I overlay our spectral occupancy atlas. Iridium, Inmarsat, WeatherSats, harmonics no one ordered. The line is too perfect until you stare longer. Then a fine picket fence emerges, evenly spaced, a machinist's smile. Natural hydrogen doesn't do dentistry. Near field versus far field. I defocus the dish. A real sky point should blur and fade predictably. The line barely cares. I slew a few beam widths. It rides the side lobes like a barnacle. A low-gain whip beside the control room hears it too, which makes the decision less romantic and more inevitable. Time of day hygiene. Plot strength against local hour, azimuth, elevation. The hotspots align with business hours and a notorious slice of horizon, the satellite arc and, inconveniently, the maintenance yard. I pull up flight tracks and satellite passes. 2 geosats loiter near our protected band, misbehaving in the margins. Self-audit. We start killing power, subrack by subrack. Dome cams, motor drivers, USB hubs, LED lighting, the vending machine. The line flickers, steadies, then drops when the yard's diesel generator coughs alive. It comes back sharper when a contractor parks a truck beneath the southern fence and flips on an inverter. The reveal isn't cinematic, it's procedural. Intermodulation between a SATCOM downlink and a cheap inverter oscillator is squirting an image tone into our hydrogen band. The truck leaves, the line slides, smears, and dies. Relief arrives with embarrassment's aftertaste. The team laughs the way climbers laugh at a rock that looked like a bear. We publish the null fast. Raw voltages, drift fits, polarization plots, azimuth heat maps, photos of the offending generator. We add a bright line to the playbook. If it doesn't pass geography, Doppler and beams, it isn't from the sky. Disappointment is still data. Negative space sharpens the figure. And yet the pulse that spooked us served its purpose. Our gauntlet is sharper, our reflexes cleaner, our courage intact. The Mars window is almost open. If a real whisper rides the hydrogen line when 3I Atlas brushes the red planet's electromagnetic wake, we will know in minutes, not months. Do you want me to roll straight into the Mars window now? T30 minutes. The control room hums. Fans whisper. Displays breathe in grayscale. I steady my voice and call the switch. Coherent D-Doppler on 3I Atlas. Wide drift scan on the new object. 2 locks. 1 chance. The operator hesitates, pen hovering over a paper checklist like it's 1969. You're sure about losing the photometry? He asks. I'm sure, I say. We can rebuild an image. We can't rebuild a tone we never record. Beat. Approval comes as a click and a rising carrier. The waterfall fattens with honest noise. Hydrogen sits quiet, an empty lane at 1420.4058 MHz. Somewhere in the glare, the new object will skate the subsolar slot and dare the heat to blink. Green bank time ticks. Maven's magnetometer is a flat calm. The Slack channel on my laptop is a slot machine I refuse to pull. A comb of carriers from Mars pops into view. Telemetry alive. The comet brightens early. 0.3 of a magnitude in 14 minutes. The new object threads lower than forecast, a hair closer to the streamer than any sane pilot would fly. Dust and equations. Beat. I call the modes: hydrogen narrow, polarization on, record voltages, 9-second integrations. Someone repeats the order. Our spectrum is empty where it matters, the way a locked bank vault is an answer. Then a ripple appears near the new object's predicted slope. Not a line, a breathing, quasi-periodic. I flag it yellow, not green. The room leans anyway. Hold, I say. Let it paint. The ripple smears, widens, resolves into ionospheric moodiness. I tap the table to bleed the adrenaline. The comet's coma grows. An inner fan leans sunward. Jolt. Maven yaw jumps. A micro CME kisses the Mars flank and spikes the solar wind density. The comet twitches in the fit, an impulsive non-gravitational kick that could be asymmetric outgassing or something that wants to be. The room pivots toward photometry. Switch to photometry and we lose the lock, the operator says. He's right. 2 incompatible schedules. I see the decision tree we published. Oaths about method over fear. I pick the sound of hydrogen over the glitter of light. Hold the radio lock, I say. Let the comet go. Beat. Mars slides behind the comet's path, geometry tightening like a knot. The limb will give us a silhouette. If there's hydrogen absorption, we might see a notch, not a message, a shadow. 3 minutes, someone says. I talk to the room, but mostly to myself. Gates are live, for the new object, earliest perihelion epoch. For 3I Atlas, Mars reference plane intercept, we score by physics, not by drama. The absorption arrives, thin, riding with Mars, not with the comet, natural, elegant, inconclusive. The vault stays shut. The ripple's gone, I report. No tone at hydrogen, logging upper limits. The pass, I announce, and it is 2 passes at once. The new object hits its gate first. The perihelion timestamp lands with a crisp tick. 0.190 AU, inclination near 172 degrees, path almost exactly anti-planetary. The streamer lifts around it like a curtain, then settles. In the residue, our dynamic spectrum shows a handwriting thin line that drifts a little wrong, weak, polarized, tempting. We run the RFI gauntlet. Cross-site simultaneity says yes, geography says no, it fails the Earth test. Beat. 3 minutes later, the comet crosses the Mars reference plane. Our clock stamps it. The photometry we didn't take would have nailed the magnitude jump. The mass-to-area debate gets to live another day. We have a verdict to write. I draft the public log out loud. Who, what, when, how. The race rule we declared beforehand. Winner, the new object. Margin, 3 minutes. Uncertainty, small enough to preserve the verdict. Reporters ping. My sister texts. Which one wins? Winning is a poor verb for orbital mechanics. I send the link with methods instead. We roll diagnostics, hydrogen line 5 sigma narrowband limit, 0.27 JY, integration time, 8.4 seconds per dump, SEFD posted, barycentric corrections posted, clocks audited and signed. Credibility is a stack of small bricks, not a single stone. The room relaxes. In the graph, a residual remains on the comet's fit, a wiggle the Marsden formalism can't smooth unless we accept a solar wind impulse term. I highlight it for the morning brief. I had to pick a lock to keep and a door to let close, I tell the operator. He shrugs. We can rebuild an image, he says. We can't rebuild a tone. Outside, the world tallies the win like a sports score. Our inbox is a tide. Are they coordinated? Is it a probe? We have none of that. We have a method. We have a clean vacuum where a message would live. We have a small kick that could be a real thing or a ghost. I post the explainer again. We picked thresholds that expose physics, perihelion for the sun skimmer, Mars plane for the outgasser. If intention exists, it hides as much in our choices as in their trajectories. We recenter the plots, widen the frequency rails and schedule scans around the streamer's sway. Forecast, enhanced scintillation as the new object grazes again. If there's plasma structure, we might hear the silence grow barbed. I keep the doubt out loud. This is a race because we named gates, drew lines, and promised to honor them. Every gate is a lens. Every lens discards something vital. Tonight, we discarded a photometric spike we may never get back. We sweep calibration, inject the tone, pull it back, check polarization bleed, verify clock skew. A junior analyst points to a hairline in the residuals and asks if it could be artificial. I give the speech, extraordinary claims, extraordinary evidence, extraordinary patience. The room nods. Beat. I face the glass. Winner, new object, I say, meaning to be determined. On the split screen, left, the hydrogen band lies still. Right, the mission clock ticks toward a new edge. The comet's fit updates. A1 is positive. A2 refuses to settle. Our error bars invite humility and keep the verdict whole. A notification blinks. A mirror site has posted our raw voltages. Good. Let the world chew. I open the decision tree and read the line in stubborn black. If gates land within uncertainties, declare a statistical tie, extend observing, report publicly. They didn't. We won't. The call stands. The cost stands with it. I text my sister again. The fast one arrived first, I write. But that's not the interesting part. She replies, what is? I type and delete. Finally, why it mattered where we drew the line. The operator turns his chair. You want a break? He asks. I want the sun to tell the truth, I say. We both smile at the impossible. Beat. Outside, Orion rises. In here, Sagittarius is a memory and a direction. We lock dynamic spectra for the sun-skimming hours and request a sliver of fast time we will probably not get. I cue a short for the public. How to hear silence honestly. I press my palms flat on the console. I count to 5. I let go. The comet keeps breathing. The new object keeps racing. The hydrogen line stays clean. The streamer leans. The world asks questions we cannot yet dignify with answers. Our job is simple and cold and, in its way, tender. We listen. We measure. We choose in advance which choices will count. And when the moment arrives, we take the measurement we promised to take, even if it costs us the one we wanted. The room dims for the next long stare. My headset creaks. The spectrum scrolls. The heartbeat in the speakers is my own. Logs up, I say. Next block. Antennas inhale sky. On my screen, the verdict line glows thin and correct. The new object won. The comet taught. The silence held. We begin again. I stared at the spectra until the colors blurred. No hydrogen line, not a whisper. The past had come and gone, the new object shaving the sun like a daredevil, while 3i Atlas kept shrugging at our equations with a small, stubborn, non-gravitational wiggle. One verdict, two problems. That's when I killed the all-in plan. We split, I said, and the room finally breathed. 2 lanes, 1 clock. We would stop forcing one narrative to carry 2 mysteries. Let reality pick the winner. Lane A would squeeze 3i Atlas until its physics squealed. Lane B would shadow the new object through the heliospheric gauntlet, listening and watching where instruments hate to go. Our rule could fit on a wristband. Maximize information gain, minimize belief. Shared ephemerides, 1 UTC BJD spine, identical logging. Anything else was theatre. Lane. A first. If 3i Atlas was an overachieving interstellar comet, the data would confess. If not, it would fail in interesting, measurable ways. We locked infrared spectra with JWST's MIRI when allocations allowed, and with every ground-based window we could steal. CO2 bands, H2O lines, organics, silicate shoulders, metal lines. We chased nickel at high-resolving power and begged iron to march beside it. If iron showed, fine. If nickel kept walking alone, the anomaly tags stayed. Photometry became our heartbeat. Small telescopes tiled the night, feeding light curves to nail spin and jet torques. Dynamics fit A1, A2, A3 with thermophysical models that could breathe. If torque matched light and the non-grav terms settled, natural. If not, a structured failure to interrogate. Mars left fingerprints. Maven ion pickups and ExoMars dust counts formed a forensic layer cake. We time-tagged every Martian blip against Earth-based photometry to test whether 3i Atlas shed material in discrete episodes that could masquerade as thrust. No romance, just timestamps and residuals. Lane B was for the daredevil. The new object loved the sun, so we went where it grazed streamers and raked magnetic curtains. Radios first. Dynamic spectra from 30 to 3000 MHz with a 1420 MHz guard band in case the universe favored poetry. Wideband capture. Full Stokes polarization. Ruthless clock audits. Near-sun RFI is a liar, so we built null tests. Off-target slews, artificial tones, independent station cross-checks, and blind injections to keep us honest. Coronagraphs became our cinematographers. Streamers kinked and curled, scintillation mimicked pattern. Thermal IR hunted hot facets and phase curve flips. Occultations pinned size and edges. We also watched for tiny accelerations that refused outgassing or radiation pressure. Both lanes marched to one metronome. Every 24 hours we held a handshake brief. Ops, data, models. We locked targets for the next day, published revised ephemerides, and pushed fresh D-Doppler templates to the radio crews. If a site went down, survive mode plans kicked in automatically. No drama, just the cadence of a well-run lab. Telescope hours were blood. I carved them 60-40 for the sun skimmer until any anomaly topped 3 sigma. Fast guarded nights. Greenbank went wideband. VLA imaged. Hubble snapped. JWST, when generous, read deeper layers. Small scopes filled gaps. Data lived or died on provenance. Raw voltages and frames mirrored within 24 hours to an open bucket with hashed manifests. Pipelines were versioned, configs DOI'd, unit tests loud. We kept an anomaly ledger. Every weird got a tag, time, band, owner, and fate, ruled out, pending, or sustained. You want drama? It found us anyway. A senator wanted the headline without the error bars. A rival PI wanted our nights. A junior analyst flagged a polarization twist near perihelion and watched 2 senior scientists argue past each other. The ledger took the entry, and I took a breath. Protocols exist for a reason. Success was measurable. Lane A needed convergence on A1, A2, A3, a stable spin, a clean nickel-iron story, and isotope bounds with teeth. Lane B needed a streamer response catalog, hard upper limits on narrow bands, thermal constraints that shrink possibility space, and zero false positives. If a coherent, repeatable, multi-site, barycentric corrected signal appeared, we would stop the world. If neither lane found purchase by our deadline, we would pivot and publish the nulls. Night by night, the split plan felt less like concession and more like clarity. 2 clocks ticked on opposite walls. 2 spectrograms scrolled like twin rivers. My team learned the rhythm. Short declaratives at decision points, pauses before numbers, acronyms spoken then spelled. 11 labs would have loved the beats, so the split became muscle memory, 2 dashboards, 2 duty officers, 1 truth. When doubt crept in, I read the wristband: maximize information gain, minimize belief, and let the numbers breathe. We weren't chasing wonder, we were fencing it, marking it, measuring it, giving it no place to hide except inside the evidence. If wonder stayed, it would stay only because the data made room, honestly. Then came the moment I tell myself I didn't expect. After a spotless week of streamer grazes with nothing but plasma hiss, the ledger showed a survivor, small, stubborn, a residual that outlived 3 pipelines and 1 bad weather excuse. Not a trump card, never that, but a thread that didn't snap when tugged. We had split the team. Had we also split the truth? I turned to the board, erased a dozen comfortingly wrong assumptions, and wrote 2 words that tasted like adrenaline. Proceed, asymmetrically. I call it our second breath. Radio campaign beta. The moment we stop chasing ghosts and ask the sky a yes or no question it can actually answer. Either a coherent, repeatable, barycentric corrected tone rides with the new object or it doesn't. No adjectives, no romance, just signal or silence. We harden everything. Clocks first. GPS disciplined rubidium, cross-checked by multi-GNSS and network time locked to TI. Every byte stamped in BJD. Every dish's delay solved to the microsecond. Drift grids widen to plus to 500 Hz per second. We add de-chirping for coronal sweep. The spectrometers get quieter, the beams tighter, and our courage a little louder. The network wraps Earth like a nervous system. Fast listens for needles. Green Bank gulps voltage. Meerkat and the VLA triangulate. Parks stands guard in the south. Small arrays fill gaps because redundancy is the only antidote to wishful thinking. We plan by geometry. A rolling cadence keys on elongation, phase angle, and LST. Overlapping windows keep 2 hemispheres on target. Coronagraph forecasts tell us when the object will cross streamer curtains. We weight those fringes where plasma loves to impersonate intent. Rapid response blocks wait in case perihelion throws a curve. Frequencies stay simple. We guard the waterhole, 1420 to 1670 MHz. With razor-fine channels and harmonics of hydrogen and hydroxyl. We open side doors at VHF and S-band, fresh masks for aviation, satellites and cellular glare. An adaptive RFI atlas updates hourly so noise can't teach us to hallucinate. Our signal models come in 3s. 1. Textbook narrowband, steady or drifting. 2. A carrier that countersteers Doppler along the ephemeris. 3. Structured bursts keyed to geometry. Mars, perihelion, Earth. For each, we sweep a lattice of acceleration and jerk built from high-fidelity orbits. Polarization can help or betray. We record full Stokes and demand agreement. Pure circular earns interest. Rapidly rotating linear does too. Then we run the Faraday gauntlet with ionosphere and coronal maps. If a flip matches a streamer crossing, it's plasma, not purpose. RFI defense is our religion. Triple coincidence, or it didn't happen. 2 far-flung radio sites plus 1 independent modality, optical, coronagraph, or spacecraft X-band noise. Every candidate meets the veto wall. GPS, ADS-B, Starlink, on-off pointing nulls. A quarantine server sits air-gapped. Spicy hits go there, away from hype. Pipelines run in parallel. One is a CUDA accelerated FFT bank that loves math. The other is a machine learner trained on spectrograms of miracles and mistakes. They reconcile under a provenance officer who signs every packet. Versioned configs, unit tests that fail loud. For the record, auto-rendered waterfalls with drift posteriors and polarization wheels, pictures that force honesty. Humans are still the hinge. We rehearse the 15-second narration, say what you see, then stop. A 2-minute cool-off before anyone opines, junior readers pair with greybeards. No screenshots to socials until provenance clears. Every decision earns a sentence-long rationale you could read on mic without tripping cadence. We grade what we catch. C0, obvious RFI. C1, single-site curiosities. C2, two-site coincidences with weak bones. C3, the living thread. Triple coincidence, barycentric consistent, polarization stable. Only C3 triggers a break glass. Then the IAA and post-detection network wake up, and our story slows. Open science doesn't mean open season. We mirror raw and reduced data nightly to a public bucket, redacting only what helps a prankster aim. Each morning I publish a plain language note, what we listened to, what we ruled out, and the upper limits that bite. EIRP versus range, bandwidth versus duty cycle. We lead with the power of nulls, because science advances on the things that fail to appear. Success has two faces. Face A, a verified, repeatable signal with structure no plasma can mimic. Face B, constraints sharp enough to matter, sub-watt EIRP at 270 million kilometers for lines wider than a hertz, burst rate caps that amputate naive beacon fantasies. Either way, the parameter space shrinks. We tie radio to everything else we know. Mars plasma data feeds drift priors. Near-sun kinematics set D-chirp rates. Thermal IR phase curves and occultations tighten size and albedo, which in turn pin non-gravitational possibilities dynamics keeps whispering about. Nickel without iron. Interesting, but chemistry doesn't get to vote in signal court. The drills are merciless. Weekly blind injections across 3 telescopes, some easy beacons, some wicked lookalikes, from trigger to public note under 2 hours, or we mark it red and fix what failed. We publish the scorecards so the audience learns that rigor has a feel, not fireworks, repetition, restraint, reach. Edge cases get playbooks. Perihelion corrupted bands, scintillation that twinkles carriers into Morse, meteor trail reflections that pretend to be friends, storms, sidelobe ghosts, hilltop microwave ovens. Each has one discriminant test and a time budget before we stand down and reassign dishes. Time is the one resource the sun always steals. Night after night we ask the same small question with ridiculous care. Are you there? And if you are, do you intend to be found? Most nights the answer is disciplined quiet, the kind that carves a boundary in the dark. But a boundary is a shape, and a shape is information. Beta will end 2 ways, with a tightened null that corners the mystery into chemistry and dynamics, or with a survivor, one thread nobody can break, entering quarantine as the sun-skimming ambush begins. Either way, we pivot into the long vigil of Earth approach. Either way, the race will have to declare itself in public view, and we will be ready to hear it. Heat doesn't lie. Light can mislead, spectra can charm, dynamics can tease. Heat tells me how much energy moved, where it went, and whether the books balance. Tonight I make heat our polygraph because the race to the sun doesn't care about opinions, it cares about power. We cast a net across wavelengths and time. JWST's MIRI covers 10 to 21 microns. NIR spec checks for hot row vibrational lines. NEO-WISE supplies cadence on the climb. From the ground, VISA grabs mid-IR, and ALMA samples the sub-millimeter where cold grains glow. The goal is continuity, before perihelion, through glare, and out again. The physics is blunt. Absorbed sunlight equals thermal radiation plus conduction. Bond albedo sets intake. Emissivity decides how efficiently the surface cools. Beaming encodes roughness and self-heating. Thermal inertia sets lag and the depth of the diurnal wave. Sublimation fronts for water, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide awaken at different distances, each adding gas thrust. Thermal photons themselves push a tiny but honest recoil. What do we read from heat? Color temperature versus a local blackbody. Beaming evolution with phase angle, rotational thermal light curves that betray roughness and pole, ALMA flux that isolates millimeter grains and decouples coma from nucleus. We compare thermal radius with Hubble's reflected cross-section to solve for albedo. We pair gas production rates with thermal power to estimate active fraction. Then we watch how those quantities bend with distance and time. Models climb a ladder. First rung, neat M grids over radius, albedo, emissivity, beaming. We fit multiband fluxes with phase corrections. Second rung, a full thermophysical model on a shape from light curve inversion with facet roughness, thermal inertia Gauss, spin axis, and seasons. Third rung, a gas and dust engine that maps sublimation, jet collimation, and non-gravitational acceleration. We wrap the stack in Bayesian inference and propagate calibration to the posteriors. Every investigation needs rivals. HSO says small, dark, rough, CO2 rich. The overperformance is low albedo plus beaming. H1 prefers a sintered crust with patchy vents. Thermal lag shifts the activity peak and fakes thrust. H2 hides CO pockets under a dust mantle. Episodic outbursts drive spikes. H3 invokes a bright shell that suppresses heating. Distant activity runs on more volatile ices. H4 whispers engineered surfaces and thermal control. Confounders lurk everywhere. Mixed grains blur color temperature. Coma contaminates nucleus apertures. Unknown spin smears thermal light curves. Poor phase inflates beaming until it forgets physics. Calibration drift and coronal backgrounds near perihelion masquerade as warmth. We counter with PSF subtraction, aperture growth curves to split coma and nucleus, simultaneous optical phase curves, and dual-band redundancy. Cadence is choreography. Pre-dawn mid-IR, nightly optical, weekly, ALMA, JWST sprints when guidance allows. Thermal spikes trigger de-chirped radio sweeps and fast refits of the non-gravitational term. On my wall, a traffic light dashboard gates claims green for converged posteriors, yellow for model tension, red for geometry gaps that demand patience. The bar for belief stays high. I want triad agreement, thermophysics, dynamics and spectroscopy, nodding within 1 sigma on radius and active area. If the thermal power budget cannot fund the measured acceleration, I won't let mysterious propulsion crawl into the paper. If the beaming inertia phase triangle refuses to close, we postpone judgment, extend cadence, pivot geometry, and invite fresh eyes. Tonight the pipeline hums. Miri frames drip in, white against black, heat against nothing. First fits suggest a low albedo pebble with rough skin and modest inertia, its beaming peaking near 90 degrees phase and calming as geometry widens. Alma says large grains are cool and sparse. Neo-Wise agrees on color. Hubble's cross-section and our thermal radius intersect cleanly, which means the albedo solution is not playing games. Yet a narrow excess remains when I sum energy and compare to the tiny shove hiding in the trajectory residuals. Not a headline, not a miracle, but a whisper that outgassing alone is tight on the margin. Is it coma contamination, a wrong pole, an unmodeled vent, cold jets peeking from the night side? Or something stranger that thermal photons would rather not confess? I breathe, rebin, and refit. The excess shifts but refuses to die. I push inertia higher, the fit worsens. Lower emissivity, the silicate shoulder rebels. Tilt the pole, the thermal light curve loses phase with the optical. The model tries to invent a beaming parameter that soaks up geometry like a sponge. I refuse to let it. Heat doesn't lie, but it does test my resolve. So I lock the priors, widen the posteriors, and slap a yellow card on the dashboard. Tomorrow we add a Miri visit, extend ALMA by an hour, and tighten optical phase coverage. If truth hides in warmth, we will corner it. If warmth runs out of truth, that will be its own answer. Either way, the thermometer stays on, and the clock keeps ticking. We keep listening. Midnight bleeds into the monitors. The control room smells like cold coffee and hot power supplies. I'm alone with the plots. 3 windows matter: heat, thrust, truth. On the first, the thermal curve refuses to sit still. It rises a fraction too early, cools a fraction too slow. Not an alarm bell, an itch. On the second, the non-gravitational acceleration clings to the sunlight vector, but misaligns by 2 degrees. On the third, a checklist stares back at me. Bias, closure, replication, all half-lit, none satisfied. If this is natural, why does it feel choreographed? We missed 2 JWST slots. Solar angle constraints squeezed them out. Alma lost coherence in thin clouds. Fast flagged a narrow spike, then killed it as a satellite spiral. The Mars relay trimmed our downlink to save fuel. The press office sent a polite dagger, dial down speculation. Each line by itself is ordinary. Together they land like hail. I scroll back through nights of careful doubt. I replay the quiet ways a team can bias itself. A raised eyebrow, a too eager color bar, a sigh that says, "Keep that." The Sagittarius echo hums in my skull like tinnitus. I named it. I nurtured it. Maybe I let it steer. So I draw a new line. No conclusion passes unless it survives 3 adversaries. Heat, dynamics, spectrum. Each must agree within 1 sigma, and the analysis that stitches them must be written by someone who does not believe. I list the variables that decide the road ahead. Effective emissivity, spin axis and season, active area fraction, coma contamination, the sunlight coupling that pretends to be a thruster. I sketch a matrix of futures. If emissivity climbs, the night side warms and thrust lags. If albedo falls, reflectance lies about size and we overcharge the gas budget. If activity is patchy, the light curve beats against the thermal phase. Model them all, make them fight. Data triage follows. Gold, simultaneous multiband sets, cross-calibrated. Silver, near-simultaneous pairs. Bronze, lonely measurements with careful footnotes. We close the books with gold first. The human cost steps forward. We have 1 chance at the right phase coverage before inner system glare blinds our telescopes. If we promise a miracle and deliver mush, we teach people not to listen next time. My stomach knots. I am afraid of 2 futures, saying too much and being wrong, saying too little and missing history. A fear is data too, I remind myself, but it belongs in a quarantine folder. A ping shakes the quiet. A Mars orbiter engineer, bleary but game. They can spare a 5-minute ride-along on X-band, piggyback telemetry during a low-gain sweep. Not much, but enough to tag a phase. The radio crew chimes in. They can run a shadow schedule staring at the empty patch before and after the target to learn local radio weather by the hour. A skeptic texts, "If it's natural, the numbers will line up, so make them line up or walk away." I nod to an empty room. The resolve lands like a click. We adopt an emergency verification spine. 2 questions only until midpoint. Does the energy budget close for the measured acceleration? Does the thermal phase lock with the optical and the motion? Everything else, nickel lines, romantic coincidences, goes into a holding pattern. We rewrite the night. I trade 2 optical runs for a single long mid-IR stare. I flip on the coma subtraction pipeline, radial color separation, dual PSF fitting to peel the nucleus out of its ghost. I slip radio beta down the queue until we've mapped the interference floor, then narrow to the waterhole only when the Doppler solution behaves. I ask Deep Space Network for raw thermal packets without lossy compression. Then I set the bar in ink. We speak only when 3 things agree. Thermal radius fits photometric reflectance. Sublimation power funds the gas output and the non-gravitational vector points where physics says it should. If one leg wobbles, the verdict is inconclusive. No colors, no winks. I cue the voice in my head to read this like an oath. Low, even, with pauses. Emphasize the words that matter. Heat, budget, closure, bias, vow. The room has the acoustics of a chapel after a storm. A graph pulses blue against black. I move the cursor over a button labeled Approve Plan. Outside the window, false dawn washes the constellation grid away. The sky goes blank, then brighter, then new. I breathe once, slow and click. We close the books, or we close our mouths. Night has a sound in mission ops. Fans, relays, a thin electric hiss that settles behind the ribs. I sit at the hub terminal with coffee gone cold while the wall fills with sky. Dynamics, thermal, radio, spectroscopy. Each team tiles in staggered links. Fast checks in, VLA checks in, DSN gives us timing marks. On the side screen, Mars ops unmute. Their orbiter clocks a heartbeat. We start with what survived the knives. Energy budget closes within 1 sigma once we include dust recoil and jets. Thrust vector aligns with the sunline to within ½ degree. Thermal and optical light curves stay locked across 3 rotations. The object's drift matches the pressure model. 3i Atlas rides the retrograde lane, hotter than it should be, yet stable. Those are facts. We will not gild them. 2 unknowns stay on the table. Is the nickel-only emission about formation chemistry or processing in the coma? And is the centimeter band whisper an interaction product or intent? We phrase them as tests, not beliefs. I bring up the convergence grid. Windows stack like teeth. Mars ride-along from October 2nd to 3rd, TGO, Mars Express, Maven in passes. Perihelion corridor, HST safed, JWST angles trimmed, SOHO and stereo for glare watch. Earthside, fast on the hydrogen line plus harmonics, green bank for narrowband combs, VLA for drifted carriers, meerkat for polarization. Optical, occultations sweep through Patagonia and the Cape. Infrared, mid-IR slits for CO2 and dust temperature. Logistics lock next. DSN grants us a tight block around Earth closest approach. The Mars Orbiter team signs the cross-cal plan. We trade twilight occultations to free a continuous hydrogen window. The dashboard flips more green than amber. Then space weather throws a curve. A coronal hole opens. Radio will lift. HST cannot risk a late slew. We cut hard. We keep fast GBT and VLA in rotation. We push optical baselines to the south. We ask JWST for a narrow wedge. I make the vow so every recorder hears it. No single channel hits leave the room. Triply corroborated or it did not happen. Pre-registered pipelines. Time-stamped notebooks. If we miss the headline, so be it. We will not trade precision for applause. The wall becomes a lattice. Side-by-side sky tracks bend toward the same hour angle. Waterfall plots frame the waterhole and its sidebands. Thermal curves sit over coma-subtracted light curves, phase-locked, breathing. The risk ledger crawls along the bottom. RFI spikes, solar uplift, pointing gaps, human fatigue. Next to each line, a mitigation, a name, a phone, a time. Words shrink as the window nears. Procedures speak in verbs. Handovers drop on the minute. The room gathers into a single forward vector, a thing with its own momentum. Out beyond the glass, both arcs lean into the same light, and then a small thing winks inside the noise floor. A breath of carrier, 9 seconds long, where nothing should sit. Timestamp matches the geometry we are about to enter. It dies without a tail. No one moves. We mark it. We quarantine it. We do not speak. The fans keep their dry ocean going. My coffee is still cold. The grid is ready. The clocks edge toward 0. We breathe. When both paths cross the same light, we listen and let the universe choose between silence and reply. Night side of Earth. Control rooms glow like quiet aquariums. Clocks tick in laser-clean unison. I breathe once, touch the headset, and say what everyone is waiting to hear. Lock the ring. Greenbank takes first watch. Fast wakes in the south. Meerkat knits the gaps. Parks, GMRT, VLA slide into place like gears. Across oceans, we stitch a 24/7 listening belt around the planet. No transmitting, no clever pings. We only listen. UTC is our heartbeat. GPS disciplining rubidium and cesium clocks. 1 pulse per second snapping every recorder into phase. We sweep for cable delays. Correct sampler offsets. Shave jitter until the timestamps lie flat as glass. Ephemerides load. I pin both targets to the sky. 3i Atlas and the unnamed racer. We push predicted Doppler drifts to every back-end, Earth-centered and Sun-centered frames both. The spectrometers de-drift in real time, letting any narrow tone sit still against the waterfall. If something speaks, it will not smear past unnoticed. I open the waterhole, 1420 MHz plus and minus, guarded like a chapel. Add OH at 1665 through 1670 MHz. Schedule ammonia at 22 GHz for the high-gain dishes. In the narrowest channels, 1 to 10 Hz, we set matched filters waiting for the faintest whistle. RFI is the predator at the fence. We hoist masks for radar sweeps, air routes, Starlink trains, maritime bands. Nulls carve holes in the beam response. Side lobes are tamed. A red team tracks reflections off aircraft and mountaintop repeaters. A blue team hunts intermod ghosts. Every suspicious spike gets a ticket. Frequency, time, sky position, polarization, drift rate. I walk the floor. Low light, coffee cold. Screens pour down in blues and grey. The noise forest tightens as the masks engage. A single clear lane opens at 14:20. I feel the room notice, the way a theatre hushes before the curtain. Rules first, then wonder. 3-station confirmation or it did not happen. Drifts matching within 0.1 Hz per second after ephemeris correction. Polarization consistent across Stokes 1 Q, U, V. Reappearance on a second night. Blind analysis by a team that does not know who saw what. We check the other telltales. Kurtosis flags, non-Gaussian behavior. Cyclostationary detectors sniff for engineered structure. Time-tagged baseband saves to secure mirrors on 3 continents. If the signal is real, it gets to survive our skepticism. Outside, clouds move like slow ships. The planet turns under us. SNR climbs with geometry, then slides. This is the crest, closest approach, best odds we will ever have. I whisper the trap list. Cometry plasma squeal, aircraft scatter, low Earth satellites, aliasing, bad ephemerides, clock skew. The team answers in a braided chorus, tracked, masked, corrected, cross-checked. We've trained to recognize the tricks our hunger can play. Pattern-seeking minds invent patterns. Tonight we let math be the adult in the room. A green lamp over the sink rack changes state. Every station reports steady lock. The world map on the wall draws a luminous ring, one band of vigilance circling ocean and desert, city and ice. The countdown reaches 0. Begin, I say. We listen. Inside the noise, a hair-thin filament brightens, then dims, then brightens again. Not a shout, not yet. I hold my breath, pin the frequency, and ask the planet to stay quiet. Please. I thumb the UTC clock and call it window green. The control room dims to ocean blue. Waterfall plots cascade like digital rain. Fans hum, keys click, and every monitor breathes the same slow heartbeat. Outside, dishes rotate in a continent-wide ballet. Inside, I steady my voice because the next 4 hours could decide whether coincidence grows teeth. Geometry first. Earth, Sun, and 2 inbound strays align so that relative Doppler is as small as the sky will permit tonight. Closest approach buys us signal strength and the cleanest frequency drift. I load the ephemerides, swap between geocentric and heliocentric frames, and let the software draw our race lines across the firmament. Greenbank, fast, Meerkat, Parks, VLA, status. 5 voices answer in staggered latencies. 5 beams spear the darkness. We agree. No transmitters, no pings, only ears. The waterhole center goes live. 1420, 40575 MHz. Sidebands watch the OH pair at 1665 and 1667 MHz. Guard channels fence off satellite lanes and airport radar. We're fishing the quiet. Playbook, one more time. Channel resolution 110 Hz. SNR threshold adaptive. Baseband saved raw, 8-bit complex with PPS timestamps. SJ256 hashes posted to the shared ledger. Any spike opens a ticket with time, sky coordinates, polarization, and a measured drift rate. Triage robots shove the packet at 3 observatories for coincidence. No triple, no joy, no repeat, no claim. RFI traps arm. The red team spoofs our pipelines with known garbage, Wi-Fi harmonics, ADS-B squawks, ship radar, a mischievous microwave oven. The blue team cleans, tags, and learns. I flip on kurtosis metrics and a cyclostationary detector to sniff periodic structure, the kind nature hides poorly. Stokes I, Q, U, V scroll in 4 neat panes. If anything arrives circularly polarized and stubbornly stable, we'll notice. Now, the choreography. Fast tips under the southern stars, a lunar pale mouth drinking space. Meerkat knits the desert into a single ear. Parks holds the waterhole line like a lifeguard. Greenbank leans through Appalachian cold. The VLA fans open against New Mexico dusk. We slide the correlator windows and watch the noise floor fall until it feels like snow. I breathe with the clocks. T-15, 10, 5. Baselines behave almost too well. Hushed, obedient, brittle. Then, at T+3 minutes, a thread lifts off the floor at 14:20. It is hair-thin, colder than the rest, drifting by the ephemeris like it studied for this exam. 3 stations see it, then 4. My mouth is suddenly dry. "Hold lock," I whisper. Nobody blink. Drift fits, plus 0.019 has SS. SNR climbing past 15 dB. Line width under 3 hats. Polarization leaning right hand. It vanishes for 1 cycle, reappears on schedule as if breathing. Coincidence, lights turn amber, green. March leans hard on Jupiter's night side. As we roll the array to the east, the planet blows a magnetic crosswind enough to shred models, and our 2 racers slide toward its sheath, like moths toward a storm lamp. I punch the sync. Juno's magnetometer ticks into our clock. Greenbank and Meerkat phase up. Fast hums on the horizon. 1 sky, 1 stopwatch, 1 question. Does nature shove, or does something steer? We preload the baseline. Outgassing at 5 astronomical units should be sleepy, a whisper, not a shove. The model gives a millimeters per second drift, anisotropic, tethered to sunlight and spin. The gravity assist is clean textbook. Change the vector, conserve energy in the solar frame. If anything deviates from that family portrait, we flag it in red. Jupiter's bow shock flares. Juno slips through the foreshock like a fish into rapids. The plasma wave instrument hisses. I lock the receivers on 3 islands, the hydrogen line at 1420, the hydroxyl twins at 1665 and 1667. If a transmitter rides the current sheet, it will either lean with the Doppler or pre-compensate with a surgeon's hand. I watch for drift rates that rhyme with the local gyro frequency, FC equals 2.8 times B in megahertz. The field is a living thing, the math keeps it tame. Io's torus claws at our spectrum. Bursts spit like lightning in a bottle, and for a minute I think we've lost the thread. Polarization saves us. Natural cyclotron maser skews circular and dances with Faraday rotation. The spike we care about sits thin and stubborn, a blade under 5 Hz wide, its polarization steady for 10 minutes while the background wobbles. I breathe again, but I don't celebrate. Telemetry from the astrometry team drops into view, a blue curve kissing a black prediction. Then a hairline lifts. 2, 3, 4 millimeters per second over the fit, small as a rumor, persistent as a drum. The timing is obscene. The moment Atlas grazes the flank of the Io flux tube, the residuals nudge upscale and refuse to relax. The new object tracks similar wind, but its kink comes late, like a pilot waiting out turbulence before tapping the rudder. Juno's star tracker notes micro-jitter. The vector math still disagrees. I call for a blind. Nobody sees the other team's plots. We reprocess from raw, with swapped ephemerides and dirty clocks. The bump survives. Maybe it's crosswind thrust. Maybe it's guidance hiding in the gale. The room goes silent. Either answer will follow us to the near-Earth window, and I'm not sure which one scares me more. We convene the ethics and risk board under white lights and ticking clocks, 12 disciplines around one table, and I open with the only rule that matters: decode, don't project. We will listen, not transmit. We will measure, not mythologize. We protect life, data, and public trust before we protect anyone's ego, including mine. I read the charter into the record. The board can veto transmissions, premature press, and spacecraft retasks. Every claim climbs an evidence ladder: instrumental anomaly, then astrophysical origin, then patterned structure, then semantic content. At each rung we demand replication, polarization checks, Doppler coherence, and blinded ephemeris swaps between teams that never share schedules. We draw the risk matrix on the wall. False positives mean panic, wasted budgets, political theater, and a decade of skepticism. False negatives mean the window closes and history forgets our caution. Worst of all is weaponized ambiguity, when states or startups spin noise into leverage. We agree on pre-registration, Bayesian priors published with codes and thresholds, and stopping rules that prevent phishing expeditions. Communications is a discipline, not a megaphone. One spokesperson, daily technical bulletins, a weekly civic briefing, and a living FAQ for rumors. No adjectives that outrun the data. Numbers first, metaphors later. Data go open within 30 days unless a documented biohazard or security exception applies. Planetary protection gets a real say. We treat both visitors as unrestricted return by default, but keep standoff modes for Mars orbiters during the close pass. No interceptors, no samplers, no kinetic experiments without sterilization and international review. We vote red lines, no active messaging, no maneuvers commanded off ambiguous evidence, no proprietary secrecy that blocks replication. We align with IAU, COSPAR, and the UN Committee. Mirror boards at FAST, Meerkat, and ESA sign the same pledge. Finally, decision thresholds. Physics only. Observe. Repeatable narrowband structure. Observe plus. Expand sensors and still no transmit. Unambiguous modulation with checksum or grammar. Convene an international panel. Release methods. Decode only. I sign the 2-page directive. Pens click. Coffee cools. For one breath the room is quiet. Then the alert banner blooms on my console. A narrow blade near the hydrogen line just reappeared, stronger than before, and its drift is wrong by a hair. The board turns to me. Do we hold the no transmit line and widen listening, or pause Mars downlink to repoint for a deeper, time-critical stare? Choose now. Midnight over Greenbank, and the control room hums like a beehive made of clocks. I key the talkback. Gamma campaign is live. Across Earth, mirrors answer, FAST, Meerkat, Parks, the VLA, each station locking time to hydrogen Marsers, each dish slewing to the 2 racers threading the inner system. We're not transmitting, we're only listening, and we're listening like it matters. Our quarry is definition, not drama. Narrowband carriers hiding in the waterhole, drifts measured in fractions of a hertz, polarization gymnastics no cometary plasma should pull off. I feed the moving ephemerides. Beamformers chase 3I Atlas's nucleus and the new object's bow, skirting solar spill with guard bands. Raw voltages spill into the ring buffer. GPUs shear them into razor-thin channels. Every frame wears UTC like dog tags. Calibration first, always. Comb injectors tick at 15 minutes. We swing to bright calibrators, then cold sky zeros. Polarization standards stamp our Stokes fingerprints. Then we slide back to the racers, the spectrum panes sharpening until the waterfall looks like graph paper soaked in stars. RFI prowls. We cage it. Satellite ephemerides get notched. Local bands are geo-fenced. Dual-site coincidence rules out parochial gremlins. Blind time swaps keep humans honest. The broker promotes nothing without partners seeing the same thing, same second, same drift. Doppler is the tyrant. We subtract Earth's rotation, its orbit, even known jetting from the coma. What remains, if anything, must carry intent or an astonishing imitation of it. We fit linear and quadratic drifts, hunt chirps tuned to inbound acceleration, test stability against hydrogen maser truth. Residuals over 5 sigma get a quiet pin on the board. Now, polarization. Full Stokes, no shortcuts. Natural mazes can be slick, but symbol synchronous flips, high circular fractions, or whip-fast position angles would be hard to fake with dust and sunlight. We forward model Faraday rotation through the solar wind to keep honest surprises from becoming wishful ones. Modulation is the third rail. We run cyclostationary detectors, matched filters for pings, Barker codes, M sequences, entropy clocks looking for intent, hiding in noise. A candidate earns Tier 3 only with structure. Tier 4 demands repetition, metadata, or geometry that sings back when we knock with our planet's rotation. Even then, we do not transmit. I read The Wall of Waterfalls, a city of neon rain. Mars ingress is hours away. Perihelion looms like a furnace. If any voice rides these rivers, the next windows will squeeze it bright. Hold your breath, I tell the room, and myself. Gamma stays dark, ears wide. Somewhere between Sagittarius and our antennas, the universe has one more chance to whisper before we decide what to do with the answer. On my desk sits a sealed envelope. The ethics board's letter: do not reply, do not beam, do not blink. If a signal crosses Tier 4, we verify, we replicate, we publish. Then we wait and let the world breathe. Together. I lay out our next move on the wall of screens, tie energy in to motion out. If sunlight is the fuel, the push should show up in the math. If it doesn't, something else is driving these racers. First, we paint their heat. JWST gives us shimmering infrared maps. Hubble and big ground telescopes add reflected light. ALMA weighs the dust and sniffs the gas. We fold it all into a spin-aware thermophysical model: size, albedo, roughness, thermal inertia. Then let it breathe under a digital sun. From each heated facet we compute sublimation, turn vapor into jets, and vector, sum the tiny thrusts. Out of that, physics drops a simple, testable promise. The thermal model predicts a time series push. Dynamics returns a measured one. Subtract the two, and either the residuals collapse to noise or they point like a finger at missing physics. Astrometry is our truth serum. Night after night we fit the orbits and solve for non-gravitational parameters. A1 radial, A2 transverse, A3 normal. If any term stays above 5 sigma for 10 days straight, it counts. Then we ask whether our thermal thrust can pay that bill. 80% or better within uncertainties. Natural explains natural. Fall short, and we escalate. Pointing matters. True comet jets shove anti-solar, wobbling with rotation like a sprinkler. A thrust that locks in an inertial direction, or steps on and off like a switch, rings a louder bell. So does night-side heat where none should be, or thermal light curves that lead the sun instead of lagging it. We guard against self-deception. Stray light near perihelion, coma flooding the pixel core, size, albedo degeneracies, each gets its own mitigation. We roll JWST to tame glare, deconvolve with injected stars to quantify contamination, and cross-calibrate color temperatures between ALMA and JWST. Independent orbit teams blind check our solutions with holdout nights. If closure fails, we widen the aperture. We look for narrow control tones in jet jitter spectra, emissivity features that don't belong to rock or ice, and torque changes too clean for geology, momentum management by design. We test whether the push correlates with our radio windows. Heat that rises when the transmitter speaks would be a story by itself. By the end of this window, I want 3 plots on one page: heat maps, thrust vectors, and orbital residuals. If they braid into one curve, we'll call it physics. If they don't, I will step to the mic and say the quiet part aloud. We are missing energy, or we are watching someone spend it. Either way, we follow the power. For completeness, we model the slow forces too: diurnal and seasonal, Yarkovsky drifts, Yorp spin-up, phase angle beaming, and porosity-driven insulation. We bracket extremes, icy snowball to carbon brick, and rerun the fit. If only fantasy materials save the model, that's a verdict in plain numbers. We log it hard. Here's the rule I give the team: we speak early, we speak plain, and we never outrun the data. That's our public protocol in one breath. Baseline: we run open by default. We publish nightly plans, cadences, nulls, and error bars in language a high school physics teacher can read out loud. Every Friday I host a 30-minute briefing, 3 slides, 1 demo, 1 what we don't know slide. No drama music, just receipts, but we also reserve quiet mode. We invoke it for 3 things only: suspected RFI that could whipsaw the press, unvetted alerts that would spark a stampede, or ephemerides that could expose a vulnerable site or person. Quiet mode auto-expires after 72 hours unless the ethics officer and I re-sign it. The clock is sacred. When an anomaly clears vetting, we flip to radical transparency. Within 24 hours we push a burst. Raw files, calibrated data, code notebooks, and a narrative readme. Everything carries a DOI and checksums. Mirrors light up in 3 regions. If you want to falsify us, here are the tools. Only 3 people speak for the project: science lead, comms lead, ethics lead. We rehearse QA trees and publish them. Every interview is recorded and archived. We do not freeload authority, we show our homework. Misinformation gets a playbook, not a tantrum. We track rumor heat maps, reply with what we know, what we don't, and pin gentle explainers for teachers and journalists. When we're wrong, we say so within 6 hours and show the diff. Risk lives everywhere. Hype spiral. We throttle adjectives, data misuse, We watermark previews and release context. Operational targeting. We blur coordinates and delay sensitive times. Chilling effect. We protect dissent and publish minority reports. We align with IAU SETI norms, national notification laws, indigenous sky traditions, and conflict of interest disclosures. Citizen scientists get replication kits, classrooms get monthly bundles. Our pledge is simple. You'll hear our mistakes as fast as our breakthroughs. Next, we face the Earth window and the final frequency sweep. If anything speaks, you will hear it with us, in real time. No secrets, no swagger, just method, humility, and a running log the world can check, line by line, anytime. T-48 hours before the Earth window, I convene the board in the ops room and lock the doors. 6 voices, 1 decision. Science, comms, ethics, legal, facility, and an independent SETI chair. I open with the rule. It takes 5 of 6 to transmit, 4 to defer. No coin flips, no heroics. I lay the triggers on the table like instruments before surgery. A repeatable narrowband seen by at least 2 sites with matching Doppler. Non-gravitational acceleration that outgassing cannot explain. A thermal map, 3 sigma off our models. Or the big one. An unmistakable call and response. Meet any of those and we may go. Miss them and we listen only. We time-box the choice, deadline in 48 hours, with an emergency reconvene if new data lands. Meanwhile, the red team hunts spoofing and RFI, trying to break our detections before the universe does. If they crack a case, it is a no-go. If they fail, the risk board speaks. Geopolitical, biological, orbital, nothing above moderate passes. I state the philosophy plainly. We do not shout into the dark. We answer only if spoken to. If we transmit, it is minimal, non-provocative, and reversible. I read the message plan aloud. Hydrogen line center with drift compensation and hydroxyl guards. A primes preamble, a handful of constants, a hashed facility ID and a TAI timestamp. Then a Doppler sweep. 2 modes, continuous wave and narrowband phase shift keying. 30-second bursts, 5-minute cadence, 3 cycles. Power capped so the object hears us while the galaxy does not. Assets stand ready. Green bank, fast, a deep space network, 34-meter, and IESCAT if the approvals land. Pointing leads the ephemeris by predicted drift. If it slips, we raster. Safeguards are non-negotiable. Air-gapped encoding. Publicly posted source and checksums. Third-party escrow of the exact bytes. Any board member can hit abort. If we defer, we publish the why, extend listening, and keep the photometry and thermal coverage tight. If we go, we mirror in the opposite hemisphere and listen for the echo before we breathe. I close with failure drills. Mispointing, run offset beacons. Amplifier heat, ramp in stages. Spoofing, sign the beacon and embed a challenge. Ambiguous reply, hold fire, extend the watch, and reconvene within 2 hours. Then I look around the table and ask the only question that matters. Are we ready to choose? Because the window will not wait, and silence, too, is a message we must own tonight together. 6 hours before our Earth window, the room stops breathing. Greenbank whispers first, a needle near the waterhole. We slam Doppler, barycentric, ephemerides. What remains, drifts, +0.04 Hz per second. The line is hair-thin, about 0.7 Hz wide, centered at 1420.4058 MHz plus 11.3 kHz. Duration, 12.1 seconds. It returns 5 minutes apart, 4 cycles in a row. Small, I tell myself, about 6 sigma over the local floor. Strange, says Maya, as the polarization flips left to right halfway through. The phase trace carries a crisp 13-bit substructure no Mauser model in our library can mimic. Synchronous, adds Kenji, pointing at the wall. Photometry dips by 0.06 magnitudes with a color tilt. Thermal maps light a 4 sigma hotspot on the anti-solar limb. Dynamics pushes an alert, a non-gravitational residual of 0.12 millimeters per second. RFI, off-axis beams are clean, sidebands silent. Parkes nulled on-beam, off-beam and kept the signal on sky. Meerkate snags the 3rd cycle. DSN-34 sees a fainter copy. We escrow raw IQ hashes and run spectrum audits across aviation and satellite registers. Nothing bites. Could solar wind twist the polarization? Could a rotating jet fake that micro-drift? The red team injects every trick we know. None produce the triple. Phase code, drift, flip. Our decision rules light green. Repeatable narrowband at 2 or more sites. Matched Doppler, thermal divergence beyond 3 sigma. The board authorizes a go ballot, contingent on 1 more pass. Quiet mode holds. We publish notarized hashes, cap any ERP, raster aim only, and wire an abort for spoof signatures. If the 5th burst lands on schedule, we answer. If it slips, who's timing whom? I breathe once, steady, and draw a box around what we can say, what we must never say, and how we will say anything at all. This is the decision packet, the tightrope between curiosity and caution. If we speak like physicists, not poets. If we err on the side of silence. First, red lines. We reveal no coordinates that locate Earth, no military or critical infrastructure, no biometric traces, no systems diagrams, no executable code disguised as compression, no steganography, nothing irreversible, everything revocable by shutting up. Now, the skeleton of the packet. I start with a preamble that declares our clock and our drift relative to the hydrogen rest frame. A clean beacon follows, a narrowband tone, dead simple, unmodulated but timed in prime intervals. Then the content layer, low entropy, high redundancy, framed with checksums we can publish before and after. We finish with a trailer that repeats the clock, the parity, and the count. Negotiation must be slow and safe. Phase 0. We announce we hear by tone alone, duty cycled, power limited, and broken by randomized microgaps to detect replay. Phase 1. A 2-tone metronome and even odd parity, the simplest ladder toward shared bitrate. Phase 2. An echo test that pings their silence and ours to estimate path length and rule out a nearby spoof. Content tiers keep us honest. Tier A is the bare scaffold, numbers, units, constants, the idea of hydrogen and pi. Tier B offers only relative maps, the sun to planets by ratio, not scale, not address. Tier C is a science trade, spectral lines, calibration targets, our instrument response. Tier D, veto-able, is a single human trace, perhaps a hello rendered as a spectrogram. I will not include art unless the board approves it with both keys. The hygiene is operational as much as linguistic. Air-gapped encoders, one-way data diodes into transmitters. 3 independent builds of the exact bit stream compared bit for bit by a majority vote comparator. Cold runs into dummy loads, a Faraday audit while the window is open. If any Doppler, phase, or polarization departs from forecast beyond 5 sigma, we abort. Governance matters. The board spans science, ethics, law, indigenous voices, and a youth delegate who will live with our choice longest. 2 keys authorize go, the science lead and the public trustee. We pre-register the schema and escrow the hashes with neutral archives. And when we speak, we publish the waveform, the schema, and the decoder within a safety delay in plain English for everyone else. If the room seizes on ambition, I hold the line. We are not sending a manifesto. We're sending a handshake. We'll stop after end cycles. We'll include version and expiry. We'll retain the right to be quiet. Hands hover over keys. The hydrogen clock is set. I lift my finger, meet the room's eyes, and ask the only question that matters. Are we ready to say just this and nothing more? Because once a first word leaves Earth, it never returns. It propagates forever, a ripple with our name on it. And the cosmos has an excellent memory, but no delete key and no undo. Under the red wash of the mission room, I unroll the chart that will decide how we move. A single tree spreads across 3 columns. Go, no go, abort. 1 clock hangs above it, counting our courage down to 0. I speak out loud so every recorder hears me, and so I hear myself. We will not improvise when the sky blinks. We will choose by rule. Go, if the sky behaves like intention. That means a narrowband tone repeats at least 3 times within 24 hours, signal to noise 10 or better, its Doppler drift matching the predicted ephemerides within 2 sigma. and the polarization holds steady instead of tumbling like noise. Or alternately, the heat maps and astrometry show a persistent thermal excess and a non-gravitational acceleration measured independently by two facilities. All radio frequency interference screens must come back clean. If those gates open, we transmit a Tier A whisper, milliwatts, short bursts, long pauses. We log everything, hash the logs, escrow them, and hold our breath. No go, if the sky is interesting but incoherent, maybe the tone flickers once or twice with SNR below 10, or the drift broadens or telescopes disagree, or the weather turns the ionosphere into a funhouse mirror, maybe equipment flags amber. In that case, we widen the band, expand Doppler coverage, add polarization sweeps, and keep listening 48 more hours. No transmissions, no heroics, just discipline. Curiosity survives, but so does caution. Abort if the sky tries to game us. If cross-checks show spoofing or ducting, if anyone asks for protected keys, if our own transmitters leak into the protected hydrogen line, or if the trajectory solutions hint at deliberate earthward targeting that could threaten spacecraft, we pull the big lever, power down emitters, drop relays, isolate racks with physical interlocks, notify spectrum authorities, publish a minimal incident log, and go dark until review. Authority is two key: science lead and public advocate. If either turns the key to no, we default to no-go. Decisions expire after 6 hours. We must revote with fresh data. Every control change writes to an immutable ledger and a third-party escrow. We abide by IAU, ITU, and COPUOS guidance, and we keep the emergency line to orbital traffic control warmed and waiting. Success is boring on purpose. Decisions issued within 90 seconds after criteria are met. No violations of protected bands. A complete audit trail. False positives under 1% when we audit ourselves later, and again and again. The team watches me mark the thresholds in ink. The clock keeps eating minutes. I am very aware that these rules were written by hopeful primates trying to be adults on a galactic stage, but rules beat wishes. And if the next window opens with 17 minutes left and the SNR finally tips to 10.1, we will be ready. Not as gamblers, but as custodians. I cap the marker, meet every pair of eyes, and say it plainly. If the tree says go, we go. If it says no go, we breathe. If it says abort, we live to listen again. We serve the data, not our fear, not our pride today. The vote is over. Chairs roll back in a soft chorus, and the room exhales. Lights dim to protect the night eyes. Screens slide to low-contrast blues. Somewhere behind the racks, a relay clicks. Then the clock claims the room. Tick. I steady my breath until I can fit it between seconds. On the desk, the laminated contingency tree smells faintly of dry ink and human hands. Boredom is courage, I remind myself. We serve the data, not the story. We serve the data. Time goes syrupy. A trajectory pane crawls 1 pixel, another, Atlas, and the newcomer inch across their ephemerides like ants over glass. Bitrate monitors hold green, hashes commit, backups mirror, no heroics, only systems doing what they promised. Faces glow in the dim, no quips, no bravado, just pupils steady in pools of blue. The Mars clock in the corner blinks from hours to minutes, and nobody mentions it. We have rehearsed this stillness so many times that it finally feels real. Tick. A whisper brushes the scope, nothing more than a flirt below threshold. Log it, I say. The room does not lean. The room records, stamps, moves on. Coffee sputters in the kitchenette like a tiny engine. A door seal thumps. History waits while the ordinary clears its throat. Outside, deserts cool and oceans blacken, cities dim to neon skeletons. Somewhere a kid points a cheap telescope at the wrong patch of sky and feels the right kind of wonder anyway. Under all of it, the same second hand moves. I roll my shoulders and feel the planet turning under my chair. Our protocols are weight belts. Do no harm, no uplink without criteria, met and remet. Decode, don't project. If the unknown knocks, we answer with math, not myth. Hands hover, cursors tremble and stop. We watch nothing with full attention. Tick. Competence hums louder than hope. Racks breathe. Fans need the air. The amber triangle on thermal 3 blinks non-critical and waits its turn. I could chase it. I don't. Ladder steps exist for nights like this. I glance once at the public tiles and darken them. Tonight we live on interior time. Outside opinion can pound on glass. Our room is a tide pool cut off at low tide, quiet enough to hear the algae think. Breathe on the beat, I whisper, just for me. The scheduler drops a digit. The Mars window becomes a doorframe. Earth closest approach shaves a minute. Someone notices. I do. Tick. If the tick stops, what stops with it? Across bandwidth and vacuum, patience is propulsion. We burn discipline instead of fuel, trading velocity for certainty. The world outside wants answers. The universe owes none. We wait until waiting itself becomes a form of measurement. Nothing moves and everything is moving. Hold the line. Then the sky. Field notes. Personal ledger. I keep the room cold and the clock loud. Every choice lives on the tick. I speak quietly so the machines can breathe. Breath. Pause. Field notes. UTC timecode. Clean log. No projection. 010712. Mars window opens by 0.4 degrees. Sky background drops 3 sigma. I sync my pulse to the station clock. 011103. Hydrogen line at 1420. Force 05 plus 0.002. Meachertz narrows, then slips below threshold. Tag, glint, and park it. 1940. Stray reflection crosses the subaperture. Quick mask holds. Kernel saved for later deconvolution. 12602. Thermal map refresh. Hotspot sits 7 degrees off the provisional spin axis. Flag for beta crosscheck. 013355. Non-grav vector unresolved. Dynamics asks for 2 more orbits of clean tracking. 014121. Photometry shows grain flutter. I stop down 1/3. Hold ISO. Flatten the field. 0149 Hunquak. Nickel line peaks. Iron stays silent. I write, do not interpret, only record. 015638. SNR climbs then plateaus. The room quiets until only fans and relays talk. Pause. 020410. Atlas coma thickens ahead of model. Phase angle brightening outpaces dust law by a hair. 021244. New object sheds a short tail. Vector counts 2 degrees toward ecliptic, still retrograde. 021803. Jupiter beacon pings across noise. Magnetometer side channel clean. 022459. Cross-site handshake. Green bank to fast. Timestamps aligned to microseconds. Drift fits inbound velocity. EO23327. RFI audit. Clean within the waterhole. We lock the notch filters anyway. 024012. Pepper noise in the correlator. We reseat the fiber and breathe. Breath. 024836. Calibration tone injected. Pipeline gain stable within 0.5%. EO255. Krug. No repeaters, no beacons, no pattern. Only physics for now. Personal ledger. 2 columns I keep in one mind. Yields. Baseline cleaner than last night. Pipeline reliability up. Team cadence steady. Public dashboard calm. Jupiter slot reserved. Mars geometry favorable. A nickel line worth a second look. A pretty SNR ridge. 1 more non-grav estimate. Costs. Sleep debt compounding. Pulse too fast. Unopened message from my mother. Politics humming outside the dome. A city asking for answers. A clock eating hours I cannot replace. Yields. Decode. Don't project. Holds. Public uplink stays locked. Patience rises. Cross-team trust inches higher. Costs. PR adds noise. Doubt grows by a notch. Another private eclipse in my head. The ethics board file thickens. Ethics rails stay bolted. We do not guess meaning. We do not transmit. We do not turn silence into intention. If a voice exists, it gets to arrive on its own terms. Our job is hygiene. Clean data. Clean methods. Clean hands. Sensory log for future me. Fans. Relays. Kettle hiss. Blue screens. Amber telltales. A faint spin axis sketched on glass. Chair back stiff. Paper edge cool. Coffee gone. I mark the page with one word. Still. The tick continues. If the tick stops, what else stops with it? I close the log, look up at the Earth window opening next, and listen. Before lights out, I set 3 alarms, tape a note to the scope, and center my breathing. Tomorrow asks for steadier hands, colder eyes, and courage quiet enough to hear a whisper again. I keep the room cold and the clock loud. Relays click, the spectrometer hums. I write, not wish. Field notes first, ledger after, decode, don't project. That is the discipline. That is how we earn the next minute. Still, field notes. 0017 UTC 3I Atlas enters beam 3 1420 405 metads clean within the notch guard. Calibration tone nominal, gain drift corrected. Photometry shows a gentle roll, 12% amplitude, period uncertain, coma thickens, tail diffuse, grain sizes trending small. New object crosses array, 2 minutes later, lean tail, no fan. Retrograde low, plane hugging, hold, personal ledger, yields, the pipeline holds, the team is sober, no one chases ghosts, costs, the news cycle clause, my sister's message is unopened, sleep is borrowed. I stack the costs neatly left and keep working. I breathe once, on purpose. Listen, field notes, 0141 UTC, polarizations sweep over the water hole and hydroxyl, linear rotates with geometry, circular stays quiet. SNR peaks at 7.2, falls to baseline with beam symmetry intact. Cross-site handshake with Meerkat confirms null at offset frequencies. Nickel line persists, iron still shy. Write, don't wish, personal ledger. If nickel without iron is a mirror trick, it will show its hand in heat. If it is honest, it will still not be intention. We do not give motives to rocks or to noise. We give ourselves instructions. Do less. See more, hold, field notes, 0305 UTC, thermal map stitched from JWST pass, plus ground mid-IR, no internal hotspot beyond solar forcing, non-grav acceleration sits inside the outgassing envelope, jets flicker but vectors sum to weather, not will, RFI audit, 3 spikes at the campus bus depot, masked and logged, baseline restored, still, personal ledger. I hear the kettle sigh and let it. The room smells faintly of ozone and dusted coffee. I reread the ethics protocol until it becomes a lullaby. Decode, don't project. Verify, then speak. Speak, then own the consequences. On page 7, a penciled note. Silence counts. Listen. Field notes. 0422 UTC. Jupiter forecast. Crosswind high. Magnetosphere agitated, but useful. Slingshot tests queued for the window. We will read the wake for anything a comet should not write. Atlas, brightness climbs, new object holds, Earth window minus 30 hours, team status, green, pass it on, hold, personal ledger, public protocol creaks, quiet mode, wins votes until it doesn't. I sign my name under both options and accept the arithmetic of trust. I text my sister a single line, not tonight but soon. The send tone is a tiny bell. I return to the clock. Still, field notes, 0559 UTC, recalibrated the drift model. A slim, strange, synchronous nudge lands inside Jupiter's hiss, then dissolves under polarization flip. Natural until proved otherwise. We tag it yellow and keep listening without leaning. The graph looks like a ribcage breathing. The room breathes with it. Listen. Personal ledger. I tape a square of paper to the eyepiece. Write, don't wish. Under it, I add one word, listen. I set 3 alarms for the Earth window and wash my cup. In the doorway, I stop, weigh the silence, and agree to carry it. Silence has weight. What's decided? We hold quiet mode through the Earth window. No transmissions, listen only. The creed stands, decode, don't project. Gamma campaign proceeds at 14 to 20 megahertz and harmonics. Thermal cross-checks and non-grav fits run nightly. Split strategy stays intact. Chemistry, dynamics, radio, thermal, policy. Data escrow remains live. Cross-team audit scheduled. What waits? Confirmation of the Jupiter side synchronous nudge. A clean origin for nickel without iron. Earth window hits, if any, in narrowband. Post-perihelion residuals that won't fit sunlight. An ethics green light for any reply, a political bridge if significance crosses our thresholds. We breathe, align clocks, and listen. For one more night. The morning after the decision window, the control room feels like a church after midnight mass, still, echoing, cups abandoned like votive candles. We start with telemetry, not feelings. Atlas first. Light curve stable, coma sheared but coherent, non-grav acceleration consistent with CO2 outgassing within our 3s band. Perihelion vector matches the propagated solution to 3 decimal places. No thrust, no slewing, no wink. The new object. Next, fainter, hotter, a thread of dust rather than a fan. Its inbound speed solved to 56.2 km/s plus 0.3, trajectory off the ecliptic by 4.8 degrees. Spin period resolves at 7.6 hours, alias rejected. Residuals, small, stubborn but natural. Phase angle effects, granular jets, nothing an engineer would boast about. Truth hides in the boring. We scrub Doppler drifts against the station clocks, they cancel. We cross-match polarization with solar wind records. Correlations are mundane. We overlay spectral lines, nickel glows, iron sulks, yet the ratios track temperature like a thermostat finally obeying physics. I log the result in the runbook with a line I never enjoy writing. Anomaly retired pending contrary evidence. Outside, daybreak peels the desert from the stars. I breathe, and the room exhales together. At 1400 UTC, we release the public minutes. Headline: 2 inbound objects remain natural in behavior. Monitoring continues. We publish ephemerides, brightness curves, and observing windows. We note that 3I Atlas shows CO2-driven outgassing consistent with perihelion heating. The new object's spin period refines to 7.6 hours. We list partner facilities, thank the Mars orbiters for auxiliary coverage, and provide a next check-in time. What we do not say: the nickel-to-iron oddity that refuses to disappear, the one-frame polarization flip we haven't replicated, the squiggle in the residuals that could be a jet or a joke. We hold back the waterfall plots around 1420 MHz until the cross-correlation passes independent review. We omit my team's split vote on whether to transmit a hello tone during closest approach. We leave out the contingency trees. Reporters ask about aliens. We answer with physics and patience. Extraordinary evidence, I repeat, or it didn't happen. We steer them to citizen observation pages, to open data, to the schedule. The minutes land, the questions keep coming, and that's fine. Clarity today buys trust tomorrow. We keep listening. Subject: if tonight goes sideways, I type, delete, and type again. I mean to write my sister, but the cursor keeps blinking like a metronome for doubt. What I want to say: I'm scared of small things masquerading as history. I'm scared that we'll call noise a voice, or worse, miss a voice because we were busy sounding wise. I want to tell her about the nickel lines that won't behave, the narrow-band burp near 1420 that refuses to repeat, the way the new object's light curve taps out a rhythm that feels intentional at 3 a.m. and ordinary at noon. I want to confess that I have a message drafted for transmission, prime numbers, hydrogen, a map nobody asked for. I want to ask her if courage is pressing send or waiting. Instead, I write, all good, long night, Mars looks lovely. Then I backspace that too. What would I ask if someone answered, not who you are, but how you decided to say hello? I save the draft without a recipient. The cursor stops. I don't. Not yet. The null isn't empty, it's textured. Sit with a radio spectrogram long enough and you learn the difference between nothing and quiet. Nothing is a blank frame. Quiet is a hiss of Earth's thermal breath, the gentle comb of the receiver's noise figure, the ionosphere's rustle as dawn walks across continents. Tonight, the band around 1420 MHz is quiet, not nothing. We subtracted the telescope, the air, the satellites, the misbehaving Ethernet switch. What remained was the rough velvet of cosmic background, and layered on it, no line, no drift, no modulation tied to the object's ephemeris. Null means our model loses a degree of freedom. It trims the tree. It says if there is intent, it hides where we were not listening, or when we were sleeping, or inside physics we didn't think to test. It strengthens natural hypotheses without crowning them. It tightens power limits. At this distance, an isotropic beacon above X watts would have shouted. Therefore, either no shout or a whisper beamed elsewhere. Most important, the null disciplines the story. It forces us to earn adjectives. It reminds me that wonder is not an alibi. Tomorrow we listen again, differently, because silence still contains coordinates. The nickel question used to dangle like a neon arrow toward artificial. Nickel without iron felt engineered, until I flipped the axis. Don't ask why nickel is there. Ask what environment makes iron stay put. Iron binds into silicates and oxides that persist until surfaces run hotter than this object reached. Nickel can ride out in other phases, sulfides that desorb earlier, submicron inclusions freed by sputtering, even transient carbonyl chemistry in a CO and CO2-rich coma. Fe lacks a comparable chauffeur. In that frame, nickel isn't a calling card, it's a thermometer, a barometer, a clock. If I'm right, line strength should track CO2, iron lines should wake nearer the sun or during outbursts, and the Ni-to-Fe ratio should fall as grains anneal. So we pivot, high-resolution echelle, branching ratios, JWST mid-IR for carbonyl fingerprints, polarimetry, grain sizes, lab furnaces driving mixed silicate sulfide powders through controlled CO and CO2 to watch what leaves first. The mystery stands, but the question is cleaner. Not who smelted nickel, but what sequence of heat, chemistry and time freeze it before iron. Here's what the sky taught me while we chased two needles through a galactic haystack. Curiosity is a duty, not a hobby. We owe the sky patience when it withholds answers, discipline when it teases us with coincidences, humility when data cuts against our favorite stories. We owe it rigor, the kind that logs the null, not just the fireworks, the kind that reruns calibrations at 3 a.m. because a peak looked too perfect. We owe it courage, too, the courage to ask loud questions in quiet bands, to risk being wrong in public so that someone else can be right later. We owe it generosity, open code, open ephemerides, open nights for students and citizen observers who will inherit these instruments and our uncertainties. And we owe it care. Radio quiet hours kept, dark sky ordinances defended, satellites coordinated, spectra archived like heirlooms. If contact comes, it should find us worthy listeners. If it doesn't, our listening will still have built better eyes and steadier hands. The sky keeps its counsel. We keep our watch. Between those two promises is a covenant older than language. Look up, measure honestly, share freely, and leave the dome a little darker than you found it. Pressure didn't come from telescopes, it came from people. Cities inhaled rumors and exhaled headlines, buses carried hot takes, billboards sold fear. In classrooms, students asked me if the sky was safe, and I told them safety isn't the point. Truth is, teachers turned my spectra into lesson plans, then apologized for the silence I couldn't break. At kitchen tables, parents argued about transmit buttons and precautionary principles while a pot boiled over. Grandparents remembered grainy moon landings. Kids asked whether aliens like mangoes. My inbox thickened with prayers, threats, and exquisite drawings of comets that looked like fish. Grocery lines debated Doppler drift the way they once compared batting averages. A bartender slid me water and whispered, "If they answer, tell them we're trying." That's what pressurization felt like. A whole species leaning inward, elbows on the table, waiting for a sound that might never come. I carried that lean in my shoulders. It made me careful with verbs, gentle with caveats, and stubborn about logs. Hype rises fast, panic faster. Duty, thankfully, holds pressure like a hull, underway, still. The subject line reads, "Open when the noise returns." I write from a quiet control room, monitors purring, the log window stubbornly flat. I tell you to remember the feeling of disciplined listening, how boredom partners with courage, how the best discoveries arrive, wrapped in restraint. You will be tempted to decorate the unknown with hope. Don't. Keep the spectrometer honest, the timestamps squared, the calibrators warm. If the next object sings, let it sing in its own key. If it doesn't, hum nothing back. Revisit the nickel anomaly without romance. Recompute the non-grav terms without pride. Call the skeptic before the camera. Archive first, speak after, sleep if you can. Walk around the building and count the constellations you can't see from the parking lot lights. They're still there. The sky's indifference isn't cruelty. It's the room our meaning fits inside. When headlines surge, answer questions, not wishes. When your hands shake, touch the console, not the transmit switch. Measure, compare, share, repeat. And if they answer, write back with humility, not certainty, and sign with your name. Tonight, I aim the array toward Sagittarius again, not for closure, but for bearings. The archer isn't a bow to knot our story with a ribbon, it's a compass rose inked on the sky. Each star is a tick mark, each noise spike a degree of freedom. We didn't capture a signal. We did capture a direction. Sagittarius teaches patience. It is crowded, hot, unruly. A radio marketplace where sellers shout in hydrogen and hydroxyl. In that chaos, discipline is navigation. You trim expectations like sails. You plot drift. You log silence. You keep pointing. I think of the wow, margin note, of nickel without iron, of two objects that taught us to listen harder and model cleaner. They were not an answer. They were alignment stars. When I breathe under this winter spectrum, I feel our instruments taking shape inside me. Method as magnetometer, skepticism as gyro, curiosity as thrust. We return not to repeat the past, but to recalibrate the future. We set the array, check the clocks, sweep the waterhole, and mark the null with care. The archer doesn't promise arrival, it provides azimuth. Somewhere ahead, a lane will clear. When it does, we'll be on course. Who won? The sun did, as it always does. Its gravity wrote the finish line in space-time, pulled both racers through the same bright gate, and burned their secrets down to spectra. 3i Atlas flared, the newcomer skimmed, and the clock kept perfect time. No trophies, just physics. Who answered? We did, with discipline. The sky answered, with silence that wasn't empty. Mars gave parallax, Earth gave baseline, Jupiter gave crosswind. In the hiss between, we found limits we can trust and methods we can scale. Winning was never the point. Arrival is overrated. What matters is continuity, the chain of measurements that survives contact with surprise. We hardened our pipelines, cleaned our catalogs, jailed our ghosts. We learned how to sit with maybe and still act. If you need a scoreboard, take this. Signal, unproven. Artifact, unproven. Detection capacity, demonstrated. Public patience, earned. Risk posture, codified. Direction of search, refined. So who won? Orbital mechanics, who answered? The community that stayed on shift after the headlines cooled. The instruments that didn't blink. The students who wrote better filters than their mentors. The silence that held. We didn't beat the cosmos, we synchronized with it. Now ready. Tonight, I power down the array and leave one channel hot, a tiny red vigil against the dark. The logbook closes, the sky does not. Somewhere beyond Sagittarius, dust keeps choosing orbits. Somewhere nearer, kids press ears to cardboard radios and pretend. The next wow won't look like the last. It may be a chirp at microwave, a wink in polarization, a breath of heat where no sunlight lands. It might be a pattern in nickel's glow, or a drift too intentional to call thermal. Whatever shape it takes, I'll meet it with clean code, honest error bars, and a steady hand on gain. Sleep, then sunrise, then listening again. The universe is patient. I can be too, for now.